Chapter 663. Poor Zhu Dehai. He thought that his actions were decisive. He thought that he was like a gecko with a broken tail and that he could finally escape. But he never imagined that he would have to face two ferocious armies. When he discovered his opponents, his fate was already sealed. The cavalry from both sides collided in the blink of an eye. Just as the cavalry clashed with the cavalry, blood splattered everywhere. Sharp sabers flashing with silver light were constantly raised and chopped down. One by one, the Baiming cavalry was forced to block the attacks. Some of them couldn't even withstand one blow and were immediately chopped down from their horses. Some of them were quite good on horseback, but when faced with continuous chopping and chopping, how many times could they block? They could only raise their arms a few more times. In the end, they still couldn't avoid the fate of being chopped down from their horses. Zhu Dehai's horse-riding skills were considered passable. He was barely able to exchange blows with the two five-star army cavalrymen. Under the powerful impact, he could already feel his arms swelling. Just as he was thinking that he wouldn't be able to withstand a few more collisions like this, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to lift his arm anymore. However, when their weapons collided for the third time, a completely unexpected scene occurred. The saber in his hand actually broke into two pieces. How could this be? This scene caused Zhu Dehai's eyes to widen. The quality of the saber in his hand wasn't bad. How could it break after only 3 collisions? If he didn't even have a weapon, how could he fight? All kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind. Then, another cavalry from the 5-star army flew past them. Zhu Dehai reflexively raised his right arm to block the attack. But then, an intense pain spread from his arm to his entire body. Then, he stared in disbelief as his right arm was separated from his body. Fresh blood spurted out from his body and filled his eyes. His right arm was already gone. He didn't feel the pain because the saber in the hands of the 5-star army was too fast. It was so fast that he didn't even feel the pain before everything was over. And before he could cry out in shock, another cavalry from the 5-star army rode past him. This was a scene that he would never forget for the rest of his life. For the first time, he could clearly see his own back. That was the last thing he saw before his head flew high into the air. Then, there was only darkness, an endless and boundless darkness. The hundreds of Baiming cavalry that escaped were quickly disintegrated under 2 charges from the 5-star army. About 2/3 of them died in battle and 1/3 was taken captive. At the same time, the Baiming cavalry under General Sun Hong was also targeted by the reinforced cavalry regiment. When Windchaser discovered that Lu Zhu's troops were chasing after Zhu Dehai's troops, he gave the task of dealing with the Baiming infantry to the 1st and 2nd regiments of the 3rd Division. He led the reinforced cavalry regiment to target the more powerful Sun Hong's troops. Using young Master Yang Chendong's words, 10,000 cavalry against 5,000 Baiming cavalry and 5,000 Baiming infantry. The battle hadn't even started yet, but the outcome had already been decided. Rather than calling it a battle, it was more accurate to call it a training exercise. Even if it was a training exercise, how to ignite everyone's fighting spirit, how to create an invincible heart through this battle, this was the true meaning of this battle. Since it was a training exercise, of course they had to choose the strongest enemy as their opponent. Looking at the battle horses, Baiming's 2,000 cavalry was barely enough to be seen. Everyone in the reinforced cavalry regiment, put on your glasses and follow this regiment commander. After adjusting the direction of the battle horses, Windchaser released a loud shout, taking the lead and bringing the 1st and 2nd regiments of the reinforced cavalry regiment to charge towards the right side of the battlefield. People shouted, horses neighed, banners covering the skies, bright 5-starred banners fluttering in the wind, everywhere. The bugle call that replaced the sounds of drums sounded again and again, loud and clear, pouring into the ears of everyone on the battlefield. Sun Hong, who was still backing up, had a downcast expression on his face. He ignored the direction of the sunlight, placing him in a completely passive state from the very start of the battle. He knew that he was going to suffer greatly today. However, he still didn't believe that he would lose, just that his losses would be a bit more serious. It was because he was leading 2,000 cavalry from the Zhenzhou Guard, the elites of the northern soldiers, possessing second-rate fighting strength. Unless they were facing the Mongol cavalry and Wala cavalry who had lived on horses since childhood, no enemy would make him feel fear. Release the arrows, draw the blades, charge. Cut the enemy into several pieces, let them know what kind of fate awaits those who make our Jianzhou Guard cavalry their enemies. A roar sounded. Sun Hong held a large blade that was over a zhang in length. After releasing a loud shout, under the protection of a group of personal guards, he increased the speed of his horse, charging towards the reinforced cavalry regiment led by Windchaser. The 1st Battalion is at the front, the 2nd Battalion is in the middle, and the 3rd Battalion is at the back. Windchaser similarly didn't show any weakness. Brandishing the cavalry blade that flickered with cold radiance, after releasing a loud shout, he also took the lead and launched a fierce charge. The two forces of cavalry with similar strength and numbers finally began to clash an hour after the battle began. When enemies met on a narrow path, the courageous would emerge victorious. A battle of cavalry where every blade drew blood began. Charge, charge! The commanders of both sides separately gave the final military orders. A total of 4,000 warhorses clashed together by the Liao River, becoming a great battle. In just the first clash, there were already countless streaks of bright red blood that splashed in all directions. At any moment, there would be cavalry soldiers that fell off their horses, or there would be broken limbs that flew into the air. There were Baiming cavalry, Nuzan cavalry, Mongol cavalry, and Han cavalry that fell off their horses. At this moment, the cavalry all displayed their abilities. At this moment, no one would show you the slightest bit of leniency because of your background or race. At this moment, if you didn't kill others, then you would be killed by others. No one was an exception. Windchaser raised his cavalry blade, already continuously hacking down more than 10 people. At least 4 Baiming cavalry were chopped off their horses by him. At the same time, 3 enemies were injured by him. His body also suffered 2 cuts. Fortunately, he had the protection of the bulletproof vest, so these 2 cuts didn't truly injure him. Jianzhou Guard cavalry is unordinary after all. After another charge, Windchaser, who had rushed to the back of Baiming cavalry, reined in his horse. He sighed in his heart, and at the same time, his fighting spirit was infinitely aroused. You guys are very strong, right? That's good. The stronger the opponent, the more you can train yourself. He believed that after this battle, although there would be some losses in the reinforcement regiment, their combat strength would definitely increase by a lot. Wasn't this what the 6th young master and himself wanted? Not far away, Commander Wu Sheng and Political Commissar Qin Bo, who had already divided the Baiming infantry into several groups, also noticed the battle on the right side of the battlefield. They saw that the reinforcement regiment already had more than 100 people killed or injured, but they didn't have any intention of joining in. If an army wanted to grow, the process must be bloody. Only after experiencing this could they become a truly strong army. During this process, others couldn't help much. Of course, Wu Sheng and Uncle Chen were also watching this place. As long as they noticed that the reinforcement regiment was not as strong as the enemy, they would immediately intervene. In short, they would never allow their side to be defeated in front of them. However, the reality was that this kind of thought was destined not to appear. After this clash, the two sides had already swapped positions. Hundreds of cavalry from both sides had fallen, as well as many lonely warhorses. However, this didn't mean that the battle was over. It was just the beginning. After the two sides swapped positions, the dazzling sunlight once again shone on the faces of the Baiming cavalry. Sun Hong's expression was frighteningly dark. Just now, he had also displayed his might and killed at least 3 5-star army cavalry. At the same time, he also noticed that the enemy had something that could protect their eyes. He didn't know what it was called, but he knew that with that thing, they didn't seem to be afraid of the dazzling sunlight. The enemy had it, but he didn't. Now that he had to face the sunlight and attack, the disadvantage would uncontrollably appear. The cavalry of the Jianzhou Guard seemed to be in danger. While Sun Hong was hesitating, the cavalry of the 5-star army cavalry on the opposite side once again charged over. It was still the 1st Battalion at the front, followed by the 2nd Battalion, and the 3rd Battalion at the back. Ma Xiangshan, the commander of the 1st Battalion, shouted loudly. Combined with the blood of the enemy that flew to his face when he killed the enemy just now, it made him look very scary at this moment. There was a feeling of a killing god that walked out of hell. Ma Xiangshan held the saber in his right hand and the reins in his left hand. He attached his body to the horse as much as possible to protect the streamline of his body and reduce the wind resistance. This allowed him to charge forward at a faster speed. This speed could multiply the power in his hands. At this time, once the saber was slashed out, even a small tree stump could be easily cut down. This was the power of the combination of speed and sharpness of the saber. The saber that was given to them this time, although it wasn't as long as the spear and saber, because it was short, it was more powerful and nimble. In addition, it had a very satisfying sharpness. The number of enemy cavalry that died in Ma Xiangshan's hands had already exceeded 5 people, which made him very satisfied. He also seemed to be born for the battlefield. After killing several people, not only did he not feel the slightest bit of fatigue, but he was also very excited. This excitement naturally turned into boundless killing intent. When he waved the saber again, his face was only left with a flush of excitement. The more he fought, the braver he became. This was the description of soldiers like Ma Xiangshan. Following Ma Xiangshan's loud shout, the soldiers of the 1st Battalion were also inspired and infected. They all shouted and rushed forward together with the battalion commander. From afar, he was like a sharp arrow that directly pierced into the ranks of the Baiming cavalry. Chapter 664. What was even worse was that behind this arrow, the 2nd Battalion's Ding Shan's troops and the 3rd Battalion's Tai Mu's troops also formed arrows and flew straight over with an unstoppable momentum. In comparison, the Northern Ming cavalry was naturally much weaker in terms of aura. In the first clash, they relied on their self-confidence, relying on the momentum that the world would avoid whenever they appeared. However, when they truly clashed, they discovered that the 5-star army was much stronger than they had imagined. Their unstoppable momentum, their sharp sabers, and their merciless ruthlessness actually caused them to suffer a small loss in the first clash. Looking at the center of the battlefield, they accounted for 2/3 of the cavalry that were killed. They were like little flowers in a greenhouse, always thinking that they were the most beautiful in the world. However, when they entered the primeval forest, they were lucky enough to see all kinds of beautiful flowers blooming. When they saw flowers that were far more beautiful than them, they naturally had the thought of viewing the sky from the bottom of a well. The clash with the 5-star army also taught the Baiming cavalry a deep lesson. It let them know that apart from the Mongol Empire and the Wala Empire, they were not the strongest cavalry in the world. Once such a thought appeared, it could not be suppressed. If they lost in terms of temperament, their morale would naturally be much weaker. Taking advantage of this time, the 5-star army once again clashed. Looking at the vast number of enemies charging at them, most of the Baiming cavalry could not even open their eyes completely. In addition to the lack of morale, the morale of the army began to fall into chaos. Don't panic, don't be afraid. We will always be the strongest. Everyone follow me and attack. Sun Hong sensed the change in the mood of the cavalryman beside him. After he knew that something was wrong, he shouted loudly. Then, without giving the other cavalrymen time to react, he led a dozen of his personal guards and was the first to gallop out. No matter what, he had led troops for many years and had experience. The more it was like this, the more Sun Hong knew that he could not hesitate. He could not give the soldiers any more time to think. Otherwise, once the morale of the army crumbled, there would be no way to continue fighting this battle. Sun Hong took the lead and charged out. With him leading the charge, many of the Baiming cavalry who were still hesitating followed him. However, they were still one step too late and allowed Sun Hong to become the vanguard. Moreover, there were only a dozen of them in the vanguard. Logically speaking, when cavalry clashed, the general of each side should be protected. After all, if the general was there, the morale of the army would be there. If the general died, the morale would be gone. However, at this time, he did not care about that. He didn't dare to stop and wait for the cavalrymen behind him to converge. Who knew if the cavalrymen behind him would also stop if he stopped? Such a move was no different from courting death in a situation where the cavalrymen were charging at him. Sun Hong, who had no choice but to brace himself and charge forward, did his best to avoid the main force of the 5-star army cavalry. He wanted to take a roundabout route and charge past the enemy cavalry. As long as he did not clash head-on with the enemy cavalry, there shouldn't be any danger. Therefore, what happened next was a puzzling scene. With Sun Hong as the vanguard, the dozen or so Baiming cavalry didn't meet the imposing main force of the 5-star army cavalry. Instead, they dodged and charged to the side of the battlefield. This was a clear display of weakness to the enemy. It was even a cowardly action. It was something that the cavalry code of conduct did not allow to happen. It was because once one side did this, they would lose the morale of the army before the battle even began. If that happened, then it would be impossible for them to win this battle. As the commander of the Jian Province Guards, how could a dignified third-grade military general not know this principle? However, did he have any other choice? He was already the vanguard, so he didn't have any more cavalry to protect him. If he continued to clash head-on with the 5-star army cavalry, what difference would that be from courting death? The only thing Sun Hong, who didn't want to die, could do was avoid the enemy's main force. Even though doing this would make others look down on him, choosing the lesser of two evils, for the sake of his own small life, he could only act like a coward. Sun Hong suddenly rushed to the side of the battlefield, indeed allowing him to avoid the greatest risk. However, what he forgot was that there were still more than 1,000 Baiming cavalry behind him. On the battlefield, following the general's banner, following the general's footsteps would never be wrong. Oftentimes, this was the most appropriate state to adopt under chaos. That was why when Sun Hong suddenly changed directions, the Baiming cavalry behind him also followed suit. They didn't know that Sun Hong feared death and battle. Under the blinding sunlight, they already couldn't see the movements of the distant 5-star army. Those who didn't know any better only thought that this was one of the general's strategies, while all they had to do was follow the general's footsteps. That was why when Baiming cavalry suddenly collectively moved to the side, it was the same as completely exposing one side of their bodies to the 5-star army's cavalry. 1st Battalion Commander Ma Xiangshan, who had originally already prepared himself for a life-and-death battle, when he saw that the enemy cavalry actually didn't face them head-on, instead exposing one side of their bodies to him, how could he let go of such a good opportunity? Raising his arm high, he brought the reinforced 1st Battalion's 6 companies of close to 600 cavalry to slaughter their way over from the side, delivering a heavy blow to the completely unprepared Baiming cavalry who didn't even have time to turn their horses around. With a raise of his hand and a fall of his blade, over 100 Baiming cavalry were cut down from their horses, also throwing the enemy's formation into chaos. They just couldn't understand how this battle was fought. How did they end up exposing their flanks to the 5-star army's cavalry? Was this really the path General Sun Hong pointed out? No matter what they thought in their hearts, it was a fact that they had suffered heavy losses. Following that, 2nd Battalion Ding Shan's troops and 3rd Battalion Tai Mu's troops arrived one after another. Again and again they faced the side, causing more and more Baiming cavalry to be cut down from their horses. Countless cries of agony resounded throughout the battlefield. In the end, the war horses still crossed each other. After passing through 3 waves of Baiming cavalry, there were only about 500 cavalry that managed to charge through. On the other hand, the reinforced cavalry only lost a few soldiers in the second wave of charge. Sun Hong had used his wits to avoid the greatest risk. He survived, but because he didn't set a good example, the cavalry under his command suffered heavy losses. When he finally reined in his horse and turned around to look, he saw that there were only 500 cavalry left. His face immediately darkened, and then he panicked, lost, scared, and terrified. He was the commander, a dignified 3rd-rank Baiming military officer. There was still a great future waiting for him. He definitely couldn't throw away his life here at this time. Many thoughts ran through his mind at this moment. As a result, after making a wrong decision, he made a second wrong decision, which was to run. He turned around and reined in his horse, galloping into the sunlight. Sun Hong already didn't have the courage to carry out a 3rd cavalry charge. He didn't have confidence in himself, Nor did he have confidence in the cavalry under his command. Right now, what he had to do was immediately hurry back to the Jianzhou Guard, and then tell his superior about the 5-star army's terror. Even if he had to be punished for this, he would accept it. In short, his life could be preserved, and then there would be a day when he could rise again. The 500 Baiming cavalry who had charged out of the 5-star army's formation with great difficulty saw their own brothers hacked to the ground with their own eyes. While they blamed their main general for his poor command, they also wanted to charge back and get revenge for their comrades. However, they never would have thought that their main general Sun Hong would run away just like that, bringing more than 10 personal soldiers with him. Retreat. Among the 500 cavalry, there were still 3 centurions. After exchanging a single look, they similarly made the decision to retreat. Even though after doing this, even if they returned, they would still be punished, but even Commander Sun ran, so were they still going to stay here and serve as live targets for the enemy? The 3 centurions made the same decision. The 500 cavalry turned around and fled, chasing after Sun Hong's figure. Cowards without balls. After a short rest, when Ma Xiangshan launched his third charge, what he saw was precisely the scene of Baiming cavalry fleeing. After cursing loudly from his horse, he immediately chased after them with the high-morale 1st Battalion. Behind him, the 2nd Battalion, 3rd Battalion, and the 2 companies directly under the regiment commander Windseeker also followed one after another. Right now, they had already won this battle. The only difference was how much of a victory they could expand to. If they could capture or kill the enemy's main general, then that would be perfect. However, after all, the enemy had fled a step first, so if they wanted to capture him, it wouldn't be easy. No matter how hard it would be, they should always try. Just like this, on the right side of the battlefield, Baiming cavalry was crazily running at the front. Behind them was a group of 5-star army cavalry following behind. Both sides were getting further and further away from the Liao River. Facing the dazzling sunlight, Sun Hong led a dozen personal guards to run at the front. From time to time, he would turn around to take a look, his face revealing a fortunate expression. Even though this time he acted as a coward, but this kind of method of immediately retreating when he couldn't defeat the enemy still caught the enemy off guard. It seemed like his little life was saved. Sighing in his heart, Sun Hong continuously used the horsewhip to whip his warhorse, wanting to quickly leave the battlefield and ensure his safety. As time passed, the dazzling sunlight wasn't as strong as before. Sun Hong could finally see everything in front of him clearly. Because of this, his eyes widened more and more, because he actually saw a cavalry appear in front of him. In his impression, he definitely didn't send any reinforcements to support him. Then where did this cavalry come from? Could it be the reinforcements sent by Sacha River Guards and Tai Ningwei? Chapter 665. Yes, that must be the case. The thought flashed through his mind and Sun Hong's face brightened up. Reinforcements had finally arrived. Although both of them were 1,000-man guards and the total number of cavalrymen was only around 600, it was still not a problem to use them well. That way, it would be easier for him to escape. The fearful expression on Sun Hong's face was replaced by a hearty laugh. He led the 500 riders to meet the incoming cavalry head-on. The warhorses of both sides were galloping forward, and the distance between the two sides was getting closer and closer. When they were only 2 miles away, they could finally see the lineup of the other side. Their faces were still unclear, but from their clothes, they could already distinguish the identity of the other side. Fuck! Sun Hong couldn't help but curse when he saw the enemy's uniform, especially when he saw the 5-star flag fluttering in the wind. Enemy soldiers? Why are there enemy soldiers here? Could it be that the 5-star army predicted that I would be defeated and escape? Of course, it was expected that I would be defeated. I really didn't expect that I would be defeated. Everything was just a coincidence. The enemy was the 3 RD Division's 3rd Regiment's Spring Sun and Tiger's Main's Independent Cavalry Division's 4 battalions. Not long after they charged out, they were lucky enough to encounter the defeated Zhu Dehai's troops. Naturally, they surrounded them and wasted some time there. Sun Hong thought that after such a long time, the battle would be over and they wouldn't need to do anything else. However, the heavens were really good to them. they encountered another Baiming army. After seeing that it was the Baiming cavalry, Tiger's Mane and Spring's Sun didn't care about which division they were from. They were afraid that the enemy would steal their credit and charged forward with their swords drawn. The 2,000 cavalrymen were like cats that saw mice. They were afraid that if they were late, they wouldn't have the chance to kill the enemy. It was actually the 5-star army. Sun Hong's eyes widened and his body trembled. How could there still be a 5-star army here? Since they were so powerful, why didn't they just charge at the first time? If that was the case, wouldn't they be defeated in a single charge? How would Sun Hong know that the number of people in the 5-star army reported by the scout didn't include the people guarding the supplies? Those people were the independent soldiers. They were usually in charge of logistics, but they were elite soldiers on the battlefield during wartime. The reason why they didn't use their advantage in numbers was because they wanted to train the newly formed cavalry and strengthen the 1st and 2nd Regiment. If they came at him with a crushing force, then what was the point of training? Sun Hong, whose heart was trembling, seemed to be frozen in place. Then a soldier beside him shouted, "General, run quickly. They are coming." There were already close to 2,000 soldiers chasing after them, and another 2,000 were coming from the opposite side. How were they going to fight this battle? If they didn't run, what were they waiting for? Where do you think you're going? Sun Hong's entire body seemed to have lost its spirit. The distance between them was too close, less than 2 li. A single charge would be enough to reach the front of the formation. There were also soldiers chasing behind them, so there was no way to run. Sun Hong had completely lost his confidence. After lamenting, he turned around and looked at the 500 soldiers behind him. He shook his head and said, "You guys should surrender. Perhaps you will still have a way out. Remember, don't resist. That will only be a meaningless sacrifice." Sun Hong persuaded his subordinates to surrender because he didn't want them to die like this. This was the only thing he could do as a general. Then he pulled out the sword on his body, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. Then he slashed his neck. His movements were too fast. Before anyone could figure out what was going on, Sun Hong had already fallen from his horse. His eyes were wide open as if he was expressing the unwillingness in his heart. But in the end, he still killed himself. The soldiers under him could surrender, but as the general, he absolutely couldn't do so. He still had his family behind him. If he really surrendered to the 5-star army, once the news spread, only his family would be implicated. So he only had one choice: death. Sun Hong died. Without their general, the 500 Baiming cavalry chose to surrender when they were surrounded by the 5-star army. Among them, there were some hot-blooded men who wanted to die for a righteous cause. But before they could pull out their swords and prepare to fight, they were stopped by their fellow soldiers. You may not be afraid of death, but some people were. If your individual resistance angered the 5-star army and they were all killed, then wouldn't everyone be buried with you? In the end, the 500 Baiming cavalry all surrendered. Normally, with 500 surrendered soldiers, everyone should be happy. But no matter how one looked at it, Tiger's Mane, Windchaser, and Spring's Sun, they didn't have any smiles on their faces. It was clear that they were still depressed because they couldn't kill to their heart's content. When Sun Hong committed suicide, the Baiming camp by the Liao River gradually quieted down. The general of this army, Tang Long Tian, was captured, and the 30,000 guards commander, Wang Tong, was killed on the battlefield. With the death or capture of their generals, the Baiming army also lost their will to fight. When they saw a large number of 5-star army cavalry surround them, they all threw down the weapons in their hands and chose to surrender. Right now, it was only 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The summer days were already very long, but at this time, the sky was still very bright. To be able to end the battles so quickly, it was far beyond everyone's expectations. This was 10,000 Ming army, and it was 10,000 Ming army that was prepared. But when faced with 10,000 5-star army cavalry, they only fought for a few hours before being wiped out. From this point, it was enough to prove the strength and terror of cavalry. It also proved how much of an advantage cavalry had when fighting infantry. Clean up the battlefield, check the military supplies, calculate the results, and send someone to inform the 6th young master. Victory at Liao River. 30 li behind the 5-star Army's main camp. Battalion Commander Su Yunxing's reconnaissance unit and the 3rd Division's Battalion Commander Guanzhong were facing off against the Cha River Guards and Taining Guards 600 Baiming Cavalry. 1,000 Guards Commander Yi La and Taining Guards Vice 1,000 Guards Commander Lu Dai each led 300 Baiming Cavalry on a plain. The 2,000 Guards' faces didn't change much at this moment. They knew that this moment would come sooner or later. Since they had been following behind the 5-star army, they were already prepared for battle. Sir Yi, the enemy cavalry seems to be a bit more than us. Looking seriously at the 5-star army cavalry that appeared 500 meters away, Lu Dai estimated in his heart and asked 1,000 Guards Commander Yi La, "So what if they have more people? It's just 100 or 200 more cavalry. We brought the world's most elite Nuzan cavalry, what is there to be afraid of?" Yi La's face was full of pride. For Nuzan to be able to become the Baiming Guard's 1,000 guards, he was destined to put in more effort than others. He was also destined to have stronger strength than normal Han army generals. In fact, Yi La did rely on his own bravery to obtain his current position. While the other Qinhu mostly relied on their ancestors to obtain their high positions, he had always been working hard at the lowest level. After many bloody battles, he finally obtained his position. Not only that, as the 1,000 Guards Commander of Nuzan, he also used his authority to change his 300 cavalry to Nuzan cavalry. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the army he led had a glorious battle record of defeating 2,000 bandits. At this moment, they were only facing 800 5-star army cavalry, so what was there to be afraid of? More importantly, he was now wrapped in battle armor. From afar, his entire body was pitch black, and there were no flaws. This was also where his confidence came from when he rushed into the battlefield. Perhaps because Yi La was too confident, or perhaps because he was infected by his confidence, Lu Dai, who was originally a bit worried, calmed down a lot. I have long heard that Sir Yi is very brave. To be able to join hands with Sir today is truly a pleasure. Since that's the case, allow me to join hands with Sir. Sir, please hold the formation. I will go test the enemy's strength. Lu Dai wanted to take the initiative to attack. In fact, half of the 300 cavalry he brought were Nuzan cavalry. This was where his confidence came from. Good, this 1,000 guard will watch General Lu display his might. However, please remember, if there is something difficult to deal with, immediately retreat. This general will come to your rescue. Yi La was very satisfied that Lu Dai wanted to take the initiative to test the enemy's strength. This was the Nuzan style. No matter how strong the enemy was, they would not be afraid and would dare to draw their swords. With Yi La holding the formation, Lu Dai was much more confident. He pulled out his saber and shouted to the 300 cavalry behind him, "Brave warriors, our chance to show off has come. Follow this general and charge." The 300 cavalry formed by Nuzan and Han people roared in unison. Then, they waved their whips and dashed toward the 5-star army. In the 5-star army, seeing the Baiming cavalry charging, the battalion commander of the 3rd Division, Guanzhong, laughed loudly. Then, he looked at the calm Su Yunxing and said, "Battalion Commander Su, you are the treasures in the eyes of the 6th young master. For a charge like this, it is better for us, the direct division, to do it." Su Yunxing really wanted to be the vanguard, but when he considered Guanzhong's words, that the scouts were made up of the most elite soldiers, it was indeed a waste of talent to use them in front of a cavalry formation that could easily be damaged. Su Yunxing nodded and said, "All right, please be careful, Battalion Commander Guan." Don't worry, Battalion Commander Su. The person who can kill me hasn't been born yet." With a heroic laugh, Guanzhong pulled out his shining saber and waved it forward. "Direct division, follow me and kill." Chapter 666. Kill. Another deafening roar rang out as the 450 cavalrymen of the 5th Star Corps followed behind Battalion Commander Guanzhong. They charged towards the 300 Northern Ming cavalrymen that were swarming over. A cavalry charge was one of the most ancient and bloody ways of fighting. In the process of such a clash, there was not much skill involved. What was needed was the morale of both sides, the strength of both sides, and the strength of both sides. This was often a way of harming the enemy by 1,000 but also harming 800. But even if they knew this, the cavalry charge was still the favorite of many cavalrymen. This was because only this kind of battle could show the glory of the cavalry. This was what true men and warriors should do. The cavalry from both sides were like two torrents as they clashed against each other on the vast plains. Men shouted, horses neighed, weapons clashed, and shouts rose and fell one after another. In just a single clash, dozens of cavalry from both sides had fallen off their horses. At least a dozen war horses were heavily injured by the powerful inertia and fell to the ground. The sounds of the war horses neighing rang in the ears of every cavalry. In this clash, the division's direct subordinate battalions only had a slight advantage in terms of numbers. The casualty ratio on the battlefield was 7-13. They couldn't even kill twice as many people. This made Guanzhong's face turn ugly. "Get ready, charge!" Guanzhong once again swung his saber and launched a second attack. Compared to Guanzhong, Lu Dai's face was even uglier. Half of the 300 cavalrymen he brought were Nuzan elite cavalrymen. Not only did they not gain any advantage in this clash, they even suffered a loss. This was something that he couldn't accept. Fortunately, the 13 cavalrymen that died were all elite cavalrymen. There wasn't a single Nuzan cavalryman. Suppressing the anger in his heart, Lu Dai raised his head and looked at the 5-star army cavalrymen charging over. He also waved his saber and shouted, "Kill!" Another clash of cavalrymen. This time, both sides were clearly enraged and the casualty ratio increased. More than 30 cavalrymen died, including 3 Nuzan cavalrymen. The direct subordinate battalion lost 20 cavalrymen and a few were injured. "Charge!" Guanzhong stopped his horse, turned around, and continued to wave his saber. Another charge came from Guanzhong's mouth. Lu Dai also roared as he led his cavalrymen forward. Su Yunxing, who was sitting on the sidelines, stared at all of this as he quickly assessed the situation. As the commander of the reconnaissance battalion, he had a much better grasp of the situation on the battlefield than Yang Chendong. After all, not every piece of information had to be reported. Some insignificant matters would often be stopped when they were reported to him. This also allowed Su Yunxing to gain a better understanding of the 600 cavalrymen on the other side. Out of the 600 cavalrymen, 3/4 of them were Nuzan cavalrymen. There was also information that they were made up of the elite cavalrymen. Nuzan had spent a lot of effort to train them in order to increase their strength and influence. Su Yunxing had seen the Nuzan cavalry before, just like the group of people represented by Hu Lu in Narcissus Town. Their strength was not bad, but it was only not bad. Compared to Lung Feng, they were still much weaker. However, the Nuzan cavalry in front of them seemed to be particularly powerful. It could be seen from the battle between them and the Nuzan cavalry. Moreover, the Nuzan cavalry didn't have the advantage in numbers. If the Nuzan cavalry had more troops than them, wouldn't the situation of the battlefield be changed? Just as Su Yunxing was seriously observing the situation, the first company commander, Yenda, came over. "Commander, are you interested in talent?" To be able to enter the reconnaissance battalion, not to mention their skills, just their brains alone needed to be very flexible. They needed to constantly change according to the changes on the battlefield. Just by looking at Su Yunxing's changing gaze, Yenda could roughly guess what was going on. It had to be said that this person's eyesight was very good. The first company commander, Yenda, could be said to be Su Yunxing's direct subordinate. When Su Yunxing was not around, he would be in charge of the reconnaissance battalion. This also proved his ability. Now that he stood up and asked, Su Yunxing nodded. The 6th young master once said that once we find a good seedling, we should recruit them. After all, our cavalrymen are still too weak. So, you know what I mean. Of course, Yenda understood. He even knew that killing a person was not as good as finding a more suitable talent. It would also add more points in the 6th young master's heart. Yes, Commander is right. According to the intelligence, the Nuzan is the leader of the cavalrymen. Furthermore, they are the elites among them. Naturally, their strength is not bad. If Commander needs it, I am willing to take the first company to test them. Don't worry, I know my limits. Before you make the final decision, I will try my best not to hurt them. Yenda wanted to test himself. This was also to gauge the other party's strength. There was a saying that went, "What do you think is false? But seeing is believing." Okay, you go. Be careful. All right, if necessary, you can use a gun. Use tranquilizer bullets. Su Yunsheng thought for a while and instructed. The tranquilizer bullets he spoke of were naturally the ones in the warehouse. After the finished product was sent to the arsenal in Crimson City, after a lot of effort, the finished product was finally produced. However, due to the scarcity of the materials, not all armies were equipped with them. Currently, only a few special units were using them. Sometimes, the scouts would be equipped with some when they wanted to catch tongues alive. However, there were not many of them. Since Su Yunsheng said that tranquilizer bullets could be used at critical times, just this point alone was enough to show how much he valued these hundreds of Nuzan cavalrymen. Okay, you can use them. Yenda smiled confidently and left on his horse. He called for 100 brothers of the first company to charge into the battlefield with him. Like Su Yunsheng, Yella also looked at the battlefield with furrowed brows. He was very clear about the standard of Lu Dai's 300 cavalrymen. Although their combat strength was not as good as his, they barely had half of his combat strength. However, even with half of their combat strength, they still did not gain any advantage. Instead, they suffered quite a bit. This made him re-evaluate the strength of the 5-star army. It was at this time that he saw the 100 cavalrymen led by Yenda enter the battlefield. Yella snorted coldly. They want to interfere in the battlefield in front of me. Men, send 100 cavalrymen to test their strength. Su Yunsheng did not move. Yella also did not move. Both sides reserved a certain amount of combat strength in preparation for the final battle. Yenda led the soldiers of the first company onto the battlefield. However, they did not intend to help Commander Guanzhong deal with Lu Dai. Instead, they moved towards Yella's troops. When he noticed that the enemy had also sent out 100 cavalrymen, Commander Yenda laughed loudly. "Brothers, the enemy has also made a move. Looks like we can have some fun. Come," the commander said, to try not to kill as much as possible. "Let's see who can capture more tongues, living and useful enemies." The scouts of the first company immediately became excited. To be able to become a scout, there was no need to mention their skills and horsemanship. Unless they were surrounded by enemies several times their size, otherwise, even if they could not defeat the enemy, they could still retreat unscathed. And now that it was only one-on-one, there was even less of a difficulty. Many of the soldiers even began to put away their cavalry swords and rubbed their fists. Since they wanted to capture the enemy alive, the sharp cavalry swords naturally had to be put away. They were all confident in their horsemanship. They believed that they could get close to the enemy without being injured and then capture the enemy with a single hand. Different from the 3 divisions who had just expanded their forces, the scouts still chose the seedlings of the Cold Front even though they were expanding from the company to the battalion. In other words, the 100 people who came out to fight this time were all Cold Front soldiers, and they were all experienced Cold Front soldiers. Not only were they very good at teamwork, but they were also very good at martial arts. Few people could be their match. And when these 100 Cold Front soldiers entered the battlefield, it was only a nightmare for the enemy. The moment they saw the Nuzan cavalrymen charging towards them, these 100 people began to perform all kinds of horse tricks. Some hid their bodies on the side of the warhorse, some completely climbed on the horse and became one with it. Some only had one foot on the stirrups and were ready to pounce at any time. In short, the 100 cavalrymen performed all kinds of difficult horse tricks. The Nuzan cavalrymen were indeed quite capable. Facing the actions of the first company of scouts, many of them also began to play tricks. They also performed all kinds of difficult tricks on their horses and then quickly closed in on the enemy. Both sides seemed to have a tacit understanding, and that was to try their best not to use their cavalry swords. They wanted to see whose horsemanship was better and whose horse skills were better. They wanted to see who could capture who in the end. This kind of battle could only be done by those who were extremely confident. Just from this point alone, these 100 Nuzen cavalrymen could be considered elites. The enemy had sent out all their elites and were full of confidence in their own martial arts. A great battle that was similar to catching a thief on horseback was about to begin. In the distance, the horse trap, a way to catch wild horses, and later used to trap the enemy on the horse, attacks. When they got close, it simply became a fight where you grab and I dodge and I grab and you dodge. All of this happened in the instant when the two horses crossed paths. Speaking of lassoing attacks, it was clear that the Nuzen cavalry was better at it. Their lassoing was fast and accurate, and a few scouts were caught because they could not dodge in time or were not used to such an attack. This made Su Yunsheng frown as he watched all of this happen. The good thing was that when it came to close combat and capturing people, the scouts were better. They were also used to capturing enemies at close range. Furthermore, to be a member of Cold Vanguard, which one of them wasn't strong and agile. This allowed them to capture more than 10 Jurchen cavalry in a very short period of time, turning the tide of the battle around. Chapter 667. Seeing more than 10 of his men being captured alive, Yela's expression turned ugly. He finally started to take the cavalry of the 5-star army seriously. He originally thought that in terms of horsemanship, the Nuzen cavalry would be the best. Even the Mongol cavalry would be inferior to them. But now, it seemed that he was too arrogant. Attack together. Draw your swords. Seeing that the 5-star army was very strong, the situation would get worse if they continued to fight. Yela did not want to wait any longer. He did not know if Commander Sun Hong and the rest had already started fighting with the 5-star army. What he needed to do now was to meet up with the main force of the army. Yi La unsheathed his saber, and the 200 female cavalrymen beside him did the same. The 200 of them hollered and pressed their legs against the horse's abdomen, charging forward while yelling, "Follow me and stop them." Su Yunsheng, who had been staring at Yela for a long time, had a "I knew you would do this" expression on his face. He took the lead and took out the 95 style from his back. Then he mounted his horse and charged into the battlefield. Firing immediately was the new requirement that Yang Chendong gave to the Cold Vanguard soldiers. Since the next step was to fight on horseback, how to steadily fire and hit the target at high speed became the main training direction for the Cold Vanguard soldiers. Some of the requirements sounded easy, but they were quite difficult to fulfill. For example, firing immediately was something that only a few people in the reconnaissance battalion could do. They were able to hit the target while on a moving horse. Coincidentally, Su Yunsheng, as the battalion commander, was a soldier with this level of skill. As the warhorse moved forward, Su Yunsheng held his gun and slowed his breathing. After he got used to the bumpy ride of the warhorse, his right index finger moved slightly. Then, a bullet was fired from the gun barrel. The bullet flew straight towards Yi Ladeo, who was waving his saber as he charged forward. He did not hurt anyone because Su Yunsheng thought highly of Yela's ability. To be able to train cavalry that could compete with the scouts, this kind of person was definitely a talent. This was also what the 6th young master needed. But after a very unexpected gunshot, Yi La, who was running on his horse, felt his right arm sink. When he looked up instinctively, his eyes were filled with horror. He didn't know when, but there was a big gap on the sword in his hand, and the blade was about to break. Who? Su Yunsheng, who fired this shot, was also secretly thankful for his luck. After a period of training, after wasting a lot of bullets, he could now hit a target on a moving horse. However, for an object as thin as a blade, the probability of hitting it was still very low. 1 out of 5 shots was already the limit. For this shot to hit, there was more or less an element of luck involved. Su Yunsheng secretly thought that he was lucky, but in Yi La's eyes, it really shocked him. Since the other party was able to hit his saber with a gun, wouldn't it be easier for him to kill him? How could the 5-star army's marksmanship be so good? Where did they come from? After becoming a Chiliarch of Baiming, Yi La more or less had a certain understanding of guns. However, from what he knew, Baiming's guns were extremely low in terms of stability and accuracy. Only the legendary mercenaries of the Duke of Loyalty's mercenaries were truly powerful, and they could fight against 10 or even 100 enemies. Could it be that the other party was using the world's most advanced guns? The thought only flashed through his mind for a moment. Yi La, who had already started his charge, didn't have time to think too much. Although he was indeed frightened, what if the other party was just coincidentally stunned? Moreover, he didn't think that the other party would intentionally hold back when they had the ability to kill him. They didn't have any relationship, so why would they do that? Quick, be careful. They have guns in their hands. We can only gain an advantage if we get close to them. Charge with me. After a short moment of hesitation, Yi La's shout rang out again. At this moment, there was only one thought in his mind, and that was to charge in front of the other party, cut them down from their horses, and then snatch the guns in their hands. That way, he would be able to gain a great merit. The Nuzan cavalry could be said to be built by Yi La himself. He had invested all of his wealth and energy into it. The other people could name these 300 cavalry, and they treated each other like brothers. When he gave the order, they naturally rushed forward and surrounded Yang Chendong's troops from dozens of directions. They were either holding horse ropes in their hands or making a flying action, as if they wanted to capture the 5-star army alive. Interesting. Su Yunxing, who had fired a shot, saw that the other party had the same idea as him. They actually wanted to capture him alive. He couldn't help but smile, and his heart was filled with joy. Obviously, the other party had also taken a fancy to his extraordinary skills and even his weapon. They wanted to take it for their own use. Since both of them had such thoughts, then let's see whose methods were more brilliant. Come on, prepare the tranquilizer bullets. Don't be afraid of wasting them. As long as we can capture these people alive, I will report back the amount of bullets used. The more he saw the performance of the Nuzan cavalry, the more Su Yunxing was certain of the strength of these people. They were definitely first-class elite soldiers, especially their horse skills. It was obvious that compared to them, they were even stronger than the Windchaser cavalry regiment. If these people could be used for their own purposes, the mercenary cavalry's strength was very likely to increase by half a level or even more. The 6th young master had once said that talent was always the most important thing. Based on this sentence, they had only used up some tranquilizer bullets. No matter how they looked at it, they had profited greatly. The scouts were still having a headache from the other party's superb performance on the horse. They originally thought that their horse strength was very strong, but when they really compared, they realized that they still had too many shortcomings. When facing such a strong opponent, they couldn't help but feel a little lacking in confidence. Now that the camp commander had given the order to use the tranquilizer guns, they didn't have to worry about killing these elites. At that moment, everyone didn't hold back anymore. One by one, they took out their precious tranquilizer bullets and loaded them into their guns. They skillfully aimed, adjusted their breathing, and fired steadily. This series of actions was done naturally and smoothly. Bang bang bang. Bang bang bang. Gunshots rang out continuously. Without any misgivings, bullets flew out of the barrels and into the bodies and horses of the Nuzan cavalrymen who were trying to get close, and in reality, were indeed very close to them. Originally, everyone still appreciated each other and wanted to control each other for their own use. This was the reason why they didn't start a fight as soon as they saw each other. But now, suddenly, the 5-star army started firing. Seeing their trusted subordinates trembling a few times after being shot, they fell to the ground with a plop. None of them could get up anymore. Yella's face started to turn cold, until it was terrifyingly deep. Use the bows and arrows. Don't care so much. His brothers died, one by one in front of him. Yella's patience and tolerance disappeared at this moment. In exchange, he was filled with endless anger and terrifying murderous intent. Yella was finally serious. He didn't want to capture prisoners of war anymore. He wanted to pay blood with blood. But at this moment, Yella's reaction was still a little slow. Just as he gave the order, the Nuzan cavalry picked up their bows one by one. The number of people who were able to pull the strings of their bows could be counted on 2 hands. In a very short period of time, Yella, who had lost most of his combat power, led less than 10 Nuzan cavalry to start a counterattack. They also displayed their martial arts on horseback to the extreme. Even in the face of continuous fire, these people relied on their nimble bodies to make all kinds of evasive maneuvers, causing the bullets to miss one after another. At the same time, they were also looking for opportunities to release arrows to counterattack. In a short period of time, 7 scouts had been hit by arrows, falling to the ground after being hit by the arrows or being hit by their horses. Yella only brought less than 10 cavalrymen. To be precise, there were only 9 of them. There were only 10 of them, and the first wave of counterattacks hit 7 of the scouts. The hit rate was 70%, which was a rather high standard. Bang bang bang. Using the short period of time when the enemy finished firing the arrows, another 5 Nuzen cavalry were shot and fell from their horses. Yella, who only had 4 cavalrymen by his side, roared and cursed. Then he turned around and left very straightforwardly. After seeing the accurate marksmanship and powerful firearms of the 5-star army, he knew that it was impossible to win with the amount of people he had now. Since that was the case, he left and remembered this hatred in his heart and looked for an opportunity to take revenge. Yi La wanted to leave, but how could Su Yunsheng allow it? He shouted and gave chase. He himself rode his horse and chased after Yi La. Anesthetizing the enemy was only a method. If he really wanted to persuade them to work for him, he knew that all hope fell on the enemy's chilly arch. As long as he captured this person alive, there was a high possibility of subduing the cavalrymen. Otherwise, the problem would be difficult to solve. With a clear goal, Su Yunsheng brought a squad of elite scouts and chased after Yella. A squad of scouts just to deal with a single cavalryman. This was extremely rare in the history of Yang Xie's scouts. It was also destined that Yella would not be able to escape. Yella's horse skills were indeed very good. His horse was also not an ordinary warhorse. It seemed to be psychic. It seemed to know its master's intentions and rushed out of the encirclement of the scouts several times when it was extremely dangerous. Yella's warhorse was well protected. It was covered with a layer of armor, even the head was covered. Although the weight would reduce the warhorse's running speed, because its entire body was covered in armor, it would give a feeling of being unable to attack. Even if the gun hit the armor, it would not be able to penetrate it. However, the powerful recoil made the warhorse feel pain and neighed. Chapter 668. Ela's face darkened as he felt the rage of the warhorse beneath him. His face was also dark as if he could explode at any moment and kill someone in anger. When he thought of the elite cavalry that he had painstakingly built over the years being killed one by one in such a short period of time, he wanted nothing more than to fight the 5-star army with his life on the line. While he was furious, he was also trying his best to suppress it. He knew that the current situation was not in his favor. If he wanted to fight with his life on the line, he might be able to kill a few opponents, but he would have to leave his life here. Death was no longer something he was afraid of. He was afraid that after he died, no one would be able to avenge him and his brothers, so he could only endure. Under the siege of 10 people, even the chainmail could not protect him. The warhorse kept neighing as it was injured, but he ignored it all. Relying on his black armor and exquisite skills, he commanded the warhorse to charge out of the battlefield. What he saw from the corner of his eyes made him clench his teeth again. It was not for anything else, but because the 5 bodyguards that followed him were also hit by the 5-star army and fell from their warhorses. This time, the 300 riders he had brought with him had all been annihilated, and he was the only one left. This made him even more determined to escape, so that he could rise again and take revenge. Battalion commander, this guy is slippery. His perception is very strong, and our bullets did not hit him. His warhorse is also wearing armor, and his body is also protected by black armor. Our bullets can't penetrate it. What should we do? The accompanying squad leader rode to Su Yunsheng's side with a bitter expression. Battalion commander, he is going to charge out. Another vice squad leader in the team suddenly shouted. He looked up and saw Yi La and his horse charging out from the area that the squad leader was guarding. It seemed that he was really going to charge out of the encirclement. Once he got out of here, he would throw away the armor on his warhorse. His speed would greatly increase, and it would be very difficult to catch him. No way, watch this battalion commander. Su Yunsheng's expression did not change, and his heart did not panic. He raised the 95 style in his hand and turned on the burst shooting mode. Then he aimed at the black horse's leg and fired 5 shots in a row. As expected of the battalion commander of the reconnaissance battalion, and as expected of one of the earliest people to follow the 6th young master. After wasting countless bullets, his marksmanship finally reached a certain level. Out of the 5 bullets he fired, 2 of them actually landed on the same area. Although it was not a single spot, both of them were on the right hind leg of the warhorse. When the 2 bullets hit the same area, the result was obvious. Although the bullets couldn't penetrate the horse, each bullet hit the horse's hind leg. In the end, the horse couldn't withstand the force. Its right leg went soft and it fell to the ground with a plop. Yi La, who wasn't prepared, or perhaps he was very confident in his armor, was thrown out. He was separated from his warhorse and flew 3 meters before landing on the ground. At the crucial moment, Yi La did a forward roll. Just as he landed on the ground, his body had already flown out. Then he continued to run forward for dozens of steps before he suddenly turned around. A bow and arrow appeared in his hand. The black arrowhead flashed with the light of death. He pulled the bow and arrow back to shoot the enemy. Yi La had no choice but to stop. Without the help of his warhorse, how could his speed be faster than those mounted scouts? Since he couldn't escape, he might as well fight. Killing 1 would be enough, and killing 2 would be worth it. The strong bow was already drawn, and his killing intent was already locked onto the body of the 5-star Army scout. Then, his mouth revealed a bloodthirsty smile. But just as this smile bloomed, he felt a sudden pain in his right arm. Then, his whole body began to lose strength. His eyes began to dim, and the bow and arrow slipped from his hand. Before he could shoot anyone, he had already fallen to the ground and fainted. More than 200 meters away, Su Yunsheng slowly put away the tranquilizer gun. He smiled and said, "Okay, tie them up and bring them back." This time, it could be said that the results were not bad. After wasting thousands of tranquilizer bullets, they captured more than 500 Baiming cavalrymen, including Yi La and Lu Dai. They were personally escorted by Su Yunsheng towards the 5-star Army's base camp. At the base camp, one by one, the battle reports were sent to Yang Chendong. Beta Persei, who was responsible for delivering the information, had a straight face. Don't think that it was because he had matured and won many battles that he wasn't arrogant. In fact, it was just because he didn't have the chance to go to the battlefield this time that he was in a bad mood. As Yang Chendong's forces grew bigger and bigger, his authority naturally became more and more important. There were not many people who dared to throw a tantrum in front of him, and there might even be none left. Beta Persei must be an exception. When he was happy, he would show it on his face. When he was angry, he would also show it on his face. In other words, as long as it didn't affect his work, his face would express his true feelings at this moment. However, Yang Chendong had never reprimanded him. Maybe it was because he thought it was fun, or maybe he liked Beta Persei's honest appearance. In short, when Beta Persei was angry, he never got angry. Instead, he always looked at him with interest. At one point, Beta Persei couldn't vent his anger. Instead, he would feel embarrassed from being looked at. In the end, his anger naturally dissipated. "Young master, if there's a chance next time, can you let me have some fun? Even Tigerhead is leading troops." After holding it in for a long time, Beta Persei finally couldn't hold it in anymore. While handing over another battlefield briefing, he finally said what was on his mind. Yang Chendong didn't even raise his head as he looked at the battlefield report in his hands seriously. "If you want to lead troops, you can choose a battalion and be a battalion commander first. If you perform well, it won't be difficult for you to become a regiment commander." "Young master, you agreed." Hearing that he could finally lead troops, and a battalion commander at that, Beta Persei's face suddenly bloomed with a smile. "Yes, I agreed. If you agree, you can now hand over to Qiu Vi and Dao Zhao's teams and leave." Yang Chendong finally raised his head and looked at Beta Persei, who was standing there foolishly, with a smile on his face. Beta Persei smiled and kept nodding, but then he seemed to have thought of something and immediately shook his head like a rattle drum. Beta Persei will follow young master, forever by young master's side. Beta Persei finally reacted. With his experience of following Yang Chendong all this time, Being a battalion commander in the army would not be considered an important position. On the contrary, it would be a very normal thing. With his status and experience, even if he were to become a regiment commander, no one would say anything about it. But once he really left the army, it would be very difficult for him to return to Yang Chendong's side. This was definitely something he could not accept. Beta Persei did not forget what kind of role he, Yang San, Yang Si, Yang Wu, and Yang Lu had when they came to Yang Chendong's side. They were the Yang family servants, protecting the 6th young master's safety, and also responsible for some of the Yang family's affairs. This was their duty and pursuit. But now, if he wanted to go to the battlefield, he would have to violate his original promise and goal. This was equivalent to betraying his own life. This was something Beta Persei would not allow to happen. But after a moment of joy, he suddenly thought of these things. He remembered that the 6th young master had said that he could leave after handing over his work. Did that mean that he would not be able to come back? Compared to being by the 6th young master's side to protect his safety, not to mention being a battalion commander, even being a regiment commander or a division commander would not be enough to move him. Beta Persei suddenly went back on his word. Yang Chendong's expression did not change, but he asked very seriously, "I just said that I agree. If you agree, you can leave now." "No, young master, I don't agree. I'm going back on my word. I want to stay by the young master's side for the rest of my life and protect your safety with my life," Beta Persei said in a resolute tone. Then, with a plop, he knelt on the ground and kowtowed. Beta Persei knelt on the ground. Yang Chendong shook his head helplessly, then raised his hand and said, "Well, since this is your choice, I respect you. Then stay. It's just that I don't want to hear the same words a second time. If you have such thoughts again next time, then just leave. Do you understand?" "Understood, young master. Don't worry, I won't have such thoughts in my life." Beta Persei kowtowed 3 more times to the ground before he slowly raised his head and breathed a sigh of relief. He knew that the young master was not angry with him for saying these words. It seemed that he needed to go back and reflect on himself. Being able to stay by the 6th young master's side was something that many people wished for. He actually wanted more. He really did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Beta Persei stood up again. Yang Chendong was no longer looking at him. Instead, he placed the battlefield briefing in front of him. "Well, take a look. Battalion Commander Su said that this Baiming general called Yella has some skills. You can fight with him later and find out what abilities he has." As soon as he heard that there was a fight, a smile reappeared on Beta Persei's face. "Please rest assured, young master. I will definitely teach him a good lesson later." The battle was won, and the dispatched troops returned one after another. Yang Chendong rode the white dragon horse and stood at the gate of the barracks with a group of people to welcome the victorious army. When any army passed by him, they would salute him solemnly as a sign of respect. Smoke was already rising in the barracks. The 2 auxiliary barracks that were left behind had already cooked fragrant food and were waiting to reward the army. The soldiers who entered the barracks first handed over their spoils of war, the noses of the dead enemies, to the officers who recorded their achievements. Then, they took the silver that had sunk into the ground and happily washed their hands to eat. The barracks was soon filled with people and all kinds of laughter. Chapter 669. In the Battle of Liao River, they killed more than 3,000 enemies and captured more than 6,000 enemies. They also seized countless war horses and various resources. The 5-star army only suffered less than 100 casualties. In the Battle of Cold Weapons, it could already be considered an absolute victory. Troops and prisoners of war entered the barracks one after another, including Su Yunxing's troops. Yella was still unconscious after being hit by the tranquilizer gun. However, his war horse had already recovered and was brought in front of Yang Chendong. "Oh, this armor is not bad." Looking at the armor that completely covered the war horse, Yang Chendong's interest was piqued. "Yes, 6th young master. This armor is indeed very powerful. Ordinary bullets won't be able to do much damage to it." Su Yunxing stood at the side and described the situation on the battlefield in detail. Yang Chendong nodded his head as he listened. He had a thoughtful expression on his face. Men bring Wu Hua over. Wu Hua, the blacksmith who specialized in making saddles and armor for war horses, came in front of Yang Chendong. As soon as he arrived, he didn't wait for anyone to ask him and walked in front of the war horse. He carefully observed it and then touched it with his hands. His face flashed with excitement, like a young lad who saw a beautiful girl. He loved it so much that he couldn't bear to part with it. All right, you've seen and touched it. Tell me, can you make a war horse armor like this? Yang Chendong chuckled as he rode on the white dragon horse. I can. However, it requires a lot of materials. This kind of iron isn't ordinary iron. It has been tempered thousands of times. Let's put it this way. After 100 gene of iron is tempered, it's already not bad if 5 gene is usable. After all, considering the toughness and weight of the iron, there can't be any impurities. Wu Hua, who already had an idea in his heart, turned around and reported to Yang Chendong respectfully. 5%? Yes, that is indeed necessary. Yang Chendong nodded in agreement. Su Yunsheng had said that the warhorse's speed didn't decrease significantly because of the iron. This was enough to prove the strength of the iron. This was also the point that he valued the most. Of course, this also meant that a large amount of iron was required to make such armor. Even with Yang Chendong's wealth, it was impossible to equip all the warhorses with such armor. Even though the amount of steel that Crimson Nest City had prepared over the past few years wasn't small, both the weapon factories and the shipyards required an extremely large amount. Not to mention, when Yang Chendong left, there was a new factory, a tank factory, which required even more materials. It was impossible for him to have any spare energy to support the creation of the warhorse chainmail. Looks like I'll have to figure everything out myself. However, the amount of iron needed to build a cavalry of over 10,000 men is also enough to make one sai. Yang Chendong's thought of equipping all the warhorses was immediately extinguished. Knowing that it was impossible to do it, but insisting on it wasn't a firm decision, but a fool. How about this? Take out all the iron we have. This young master will think of a way to obtain some from the surroundings. It shouldn't be a problem to equip 100-men squad first. Yang Chendong quickly made a decision and his gaze landed on Wu Hua. If possible, he planned to equip his 2 guards first. That way, his safety would be guaranteed, and the other officers wouldn't have to worry about him when he went anywhere. The number of security squads on both sides has been expanded from the original 30 to 50 people per squad. As long as there are enough materials, I can lead the blacksmiths to create the chainmail. Wu Hua had a face full of confidence. Interest was the best teacher. He had been learning blacksmithing from his father since birth and now had over 30 years of experience. It wasn't that he wasn't capable enough to produce anything good, but that the conditions and environment didn't allow him to do so. However, if there were enough materials, he was confident that the chainmail he produced wouldn't be inferior to anyone else's. All right, then it's settled. Not only do we have the Iron Horse chainmail, there's also an impenetrable black armor over there. Let's forge them all. Yang Chendong laughed heartily in satisfaction. Then, he touched the chainmail affectionately and sighed with longing. In the camp, the soldiers had a warm meal and everyone was refreshed. The commanders of the various battalions and companies also took the opportunity to start targeted training. They were given remedial training based on their performance in the previous battle so that they could have a better performance in the next battle. The captives were gathered together and given a full meal. When they saw that there was meat in the dishes, and that there was a lot of meat, they actually ate to their heart's content. For a moment, they seemed to have forgotten that they were captives. Yi La and Lu Dai were also among them. When they saw that their subordinates were still alive and wolfing down the food, they couldn't help but sigh in their hearts. In order for the Nuzan tribe to have the ability to protect themselves in the future, although one of them was a Qianhu captain and the other was a Qianhu vice Qianhu captain, they had been living in poverty all these years. All the money was spent on equipment and training, so they rarely ate meat. The clansmen had never complained. It wasn't that they didn't have any ideas, but that they knew that the hardship they suffered now was so that their clansmen could live a more free life in the future. Now that they had become captives, there was no future for them, so they might as well eat to their heart's content. A trace of tears flowed out of Yi La's eyes. After recalling the scene, he knew that he had let down his soldiers too much. However, at the same time, he was very happy. He thought that his brothers would be killed in front of him and that they would be separated by life and death. He didn't expect that when he woke up, his brothers would still be alive. At most, they were a little injured, but not a single one of them had died. This made him very happy, but at the same time, he was very curious about what methods the five-star army used and how they did it. Yi La and Lu Dai, my young master wants to see you. Su Yunsheng appeared in front of the captive camp. After seeing that the two of them had finished eating and had put down their bowls and chopsticks, he shouted. As soon as he finished speaking, the 500 captives all stood up. Regardless of whether they were full or not, they all stood up in unison and glared at Su Yunsheng with ferocious gazes. Although they didn't have any weapons in their hands, they still had their fists, legs, and teeth. As long as they were still breathing, they wouldn't let anyone threaten the safety of the two generals. Su Yunsheng saw the collective performance of the Nuzhen cavalry and praised them in his heart. Just from this point, he could see that the two generals should be loved and respected by their soldiers. Wasn't this the talent that the sixth young master needed? All right, I'm not bringing you to interrogate you, not to kill you. Besides, if I really want to kill you, do you think you can stop me? Although Su Yunsheng was very optimistic about the Nuzhen cavalry, his face was still very serious. Before they submitted to the sixth young master, they were still his enemies. Yi La and Lu Dai understood the meaning behind Su Yunsheng's words. Furthermore, they were now under someone else's care. Did they really think that they could not go out just because they wanted to? If they angered the other party, they would only implicate their subordinates. All right, everyone sit down. I'll go out with Chili Arch Lu. Yi La knew that he couldn't make the decision now. Even if he didn't want to, what else could he do? Besides, he also wanted to see who the general of the five-star army was and how he could train such a powerful cavalry like Su Yunsheng. With the two generals speaking, although the soldiers still had some complaints, they couldn't say anything. They could only remind the generals to be careful and watch the two of them walk out of the captive camp. On the way to the main tent with Su Yunsheng, Battalion Commander Su whispered to them, "When you see the young master later, please be more respectful. Even if it's not for yourself, for the sake of your brothers and clansmen, please pay attention to your words. Otherwise, no one can save you." Although Su Yunsheng knew that the sixth young master loved talented people, if they relied on their talents to become arrogant and even spoke hurtful words, even if the sixth young master was magnanimous and didn't lower himself to their level, who knew what Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei would do? In front of a group of officers who regarded the sixth young master as a god, anyone who dared to do something provocative would have very serious consequences. Yi La and Lu Dai didn't say anything. They didn't agree or disagree. They just obediently followed behind Su Yunsheng step by step. In fact, only the two of them knew that if the leader of the five-star army didn't have the ability, then they would never bow their heads. This was the dignity of the strong. Only a stronger person could subdue them. Otherwise, not only would they surrender, they would also have other thoughts in their hearts. It was only a matter of time before they rebelled. After about 2 miles, Su Yunsheng finally stopped and stood in front of a military tent that occupied a large area. As soon as he entered, Yi La felt a murderous aura around him. Lu Dai was a little better. His perception wasn't as strong as Yi La's. He just felt a little uncomfortable. On the other hand, Yi La felt like a lamb that had strayed into the forest and was stared at by a fierce tiger. He couldn't help but become very nervous. About 300 meters away from the military tent, Yang Chendong was watching Yi La and Lu Dai under the cover of another military tent. When he saw the latter lowering his head, he couldn't help but want to look around. The former didn't even raise his head, but his body was tense. It seemed that his body would bend into a bow at any time and he would make the strongest counterattack at any time. Chapter 670. That's Yi La, right? His reaction is pretty good. Yang Chendong pointed casually and asked Guanzhong, the battalion commander of the 3rd Division. Lu Dai was captured by Guanzhong and his men, so he was naturally clear about the situation of these people. Hearing the sixth young master's question, he cupped his fist and said, "Yes, that person is Yi La." When they captured him, Battalion Commander Su took a full squad of soldiers and spent some effort to capture him. Well, he's someone with some strength. Yang Chendong had heard about these things a long time ago, so there was nothing strange about it. This led to the current move of probing. He deliberately arranged for the Wolf Fong Special Forces to ambush near his tent in order to put pressure on the opponent and see how Yi La's perception was. After all, if he wanted to become a general who led troops and was trained to be a general who led an independent team, if he didn't even have the ability to perceive danger, then no one would feel at ease handing over military power to him. Knowing that Yi La's strength was not bad, Yang Chendong turned his head and looked at Beta Persei. "How about it? If your hands are itchy, go and give it a try." "Yes." Beta Persei, who had been impatient for a long time, agreed and walked towards the tent. His tall body seemed to cause a tremor in the ground every time he stepped on the ground. It could be seen that Yang Er's strength had improved during this period of time. Su Yunxing, who was still standing in front of the tent, was not in a hurry at all. His task was to bring these two people here. As for what would happen next, it was something he needed to worry about. Yi La and Lu Dai behind him, especially the latter, had been standing there for a long time, but no one came to greet him. This made him very puzzled. He endured it and was about to raise his head and ask Su Yunxing how long he was going to stand there. As soon as Lu Dai raised his head, he felt a murderous aura appear beside him. Lu Dai hurriedly turned around and saw Yang Er, who was only 5 meters away from him. With a height of nearly 1.9 meters and a weight of more than 100 kilograms, no one could ignore him standing there. When Lu Dai saw him, for some reason, he instinctively made a defensive move. Beta Persei saw all of this. "No, my opponent is him." Yang Er shook his head in disdain when he saw Lu Dai staring at him with a defensive expression. He spoke in an arrogant tone. No matter what, he was still a vice-chiliarch, and he had the bloodline of the Nuzan clan. When had he ever been looked down upon like this? Lu Dai raised his head and glared fiercely at Beta Persei. He opened his mouth and said, "You're very arrogant, but you have to know that you're not good at fighting just because you're big. If you have the ability, let's fight. I'll let you know the consequences of being frivolous." "Arrogant?" Yang Er laughed out loud. "Originally, you weren't qualified enough for me to deal with you. However, since you're so arrogant, then come at me. Let's see who's the arrogant one here." After he finished speaking, Yang Shou hooked his finger at Lu Dai, making a provocative gesture that seemed to be asking for a beating. This gesture was naturally learned from Yang Chendong. At that time, it was this gesture that was so awesome, awe-inspiring, and cool. It was also because of this gesture that the first and second guard teams were completely wiped out. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei were also defeated and lying on the ground. Until now, the Wolf Fong Special Forces were also completely wiped out. This was Yang Chendong's strength. However, no one knew if this was his true strength, because now no one could test the bottom line of the sixth young master. Everyone only knew that once this gesture was made, these people combined were no longer his opponent. Imitating the sixth young master, Beta Persei also made the same gesture, which aroused Lu Dai's anger. Although he didn't know what this gesture meant, the contempt and disdain in Beta Persei's eyes were undoubtedly revealed. Since this was the case, of course, he would make a move. He wanted to let this arrogant person know what the consequences of daring to underestimate him were. "Ata!" With a shout, Lu Dai's feet constantly kicked up dust on the ground. He had just eaten and was now full of strength. Coupled with his anger, his speed was even faster than usual. After running for 7 or 8 steps, Lu Dai, who had accumulated enough power, suddenly leaped into the air and smashed his fist down on Yang Er's head with the force of Mount Tai. Lu Dai's eyes were fixed on the other party's body. When Lu Dai leaped up, Yang Er let out a disdainful snort. Then, without any movement, he tilted his head, causing the fist to hit empty air. The fist smashed down on the corner of his clothes. Lu Dai's face did not change in the slightest when his attack failed. Originally, he did not expect this punch to succeed. This was originally a probing move, and the next kick was his real killer move. His body rotated in midair, and his right leg kicked out towards Beta Persei's head. The speed of this move was so fast that even Beta Persei could not dodge it. Since he could not dodge, Beta Persei simply tilted his head again, then raised his right arm to block his more vulnerable neck. Clang! The kick landed squarely on Beta Persei's forearm. The powerful force caused Lu Dai's body to tremble, and he retreated several steps. At this moment, there was a trace of pain on his face. This time, he was the first to attack, but when this kick landed on Beta Persei's arm, it was as if he had kicked a thick iron plate. It brought him endless pain, causing the corners of his mouth to twitch. Still want to leave? Seeing that Lu Dai, who had failed in his attack, wanted to land and retreat again after the kick, Beta Persei was not willing to agree. He did not make a move before because he wanted to test the opponent's ability. Now that he knew the opponent's approximate strength, it was time for him to counterattack. With a roar, Beta Persei's right arm suddenly grabbed forward, accurately grabbing Lu Dai's ankle in his hand. Then his body suddenly spun on the spot, forcibly lifting Lu Dai's body into the air. You can go now. After spinning for more than half a circle, Beta Persei felt that Lu Dai's entire body was spinning with his body. He suddenly loosened his grip, and the figure flew forward like an arrow. Puff! After about a breath's time, Lu Dai's entire body was smashed to the ground. At that moment, he felt as if all the bones in his body had fallen apart, and there was nothing but pain. This was because Beta Persei had controlled his strength. Otherwise, this throw would have smashed him to death. After Lu Dai was thrown out, Beta Persei regained his footing. He clapped his hands and said with an indifferent look, "Okay, the noisy person is gone. Now you can fight with me." His gaze fell on Yi La. Beta Persei clenched his fists, producing a creaking sound. Yi La saw the scene just now from the beginning to the end. Because of this, he did not dare to underestimate Beta Persei. On the contrary, he was constantly evaluating him in his heart. In the end, he shook his head and said in an unwilling and sad tone, "I'm not your opponent." Oh, Beta Persei, who was preparing for a big fight, suddenly froze after hearing Yi La's words. This was inconsistent with the task given by the young master. After thinking for a while, he turned to look in the direction where Yang Chendong was standing. At this time, Yang Chendong was striding over and happened to hear Yi La's answer. Compared to other people who would show a look of suspicion or even contempt, Yang Chendong's expression did not change. On the contrary, if one looked carefully, there was a trace of joy. In this era, people who could ride horses on the battlefield all boasted that they were men. Each and every one of them had their eyes on the top of their heads. When it came to a bloody battle, it was about who had more people, who had more strength, and who dared to fight to the death. On the contrary, there were very few people like Yi La who admitted that they were inferior to others in terms of strength. But because there were very few of them, it was abrupt and even looked down on by most people. As a northern Ming guard 1,000 households, admitting defeat before the battle was naturally a sign of cowardice in their eyes. It was a cowardly act. This Yi La doesn't seem to be as strong as Battalion Commander Su said. Tiger's Mane was the first to assert. Not only him, but the first guard captain Xiao Vi and the second guard captain Dao Xiao also nodded in agreement. It's important to know one's own name. This is the ability that a commander should have. Without waiting for others to mock him, Yang Chendong suddenly opened his mouth. Instantly, Tiger's Mane and the others' expressions changed. The laughter that was about to come out was stuck in their throats. Ignoring the wonderful changes in the expressions of the people around him, Yang Chendong strode in front of Yi La and looked at him with interest. "Well, you admit defeat before the battle. Do you know that people will look down on you if you do this?" Yang Chendong did not reveal his identity, so Yi La did not ask. But he could still see that although the person who asked the question was young, he was indeed surrounded by people like the stars around the moon. His identity must not be simple. Out of politeness, he replied, "It doesn't matter if people look down on us or not. We live for ourselves, not in the eyes of others." Interesting. Hearing this answer, Yang Chendong seemed to be even more interested. But I don't know why you admitted defeat directly. Don't you have the courage to even try? Yi La had already said that he did not want to live in the eyes of others, but Yang Chendong brought up this matter again. Yi La was too lazy to answer. He turned his head away and looked like he was unwilling to answer. This was heard by Su Yunxing, who was standing at the side. He was afraid that the sixth young master would be angry, so he quickly whispered, Yi La, don't be arrogant. This is our sixth young master and also the great Ming's loyal duke. Chapter 671. Su Yunxing was aware of Yi La's abilities, so he reminded him out of kindness. However, Yi La didn't seem to appreciate it. What do you mean by, don't be arrogant? What do you mean by, our sixth young master? He's clearly yours, okay? And what about the great Ming's loyal duke? What the hell is that? Loyal duke? Loyal duke? Yella, who was half a beat slower in reaction, changed her expression and looked at Yang Chendong again. She then asked with a shocked expression, what did you say? Did you just say that you're the Duke of Loyalty of the great Ming dynasty? Are you the war god's loyal duke? It was no wonder that Yi La was so shocked. Although New Ergon Dusi was far away from Baiming's capital, they had heard about the war god's continuous victories and how he forced the Walla's army to retreat. The female Zhenren prided herself as the strongest person in this era, so she naturally respected the strongest people. When he heard the news, he had thought more than once that he must meet the war god if he had the chance. He didn't expect that his wish would come true today. Yi La stood in front of Yang Chendong in shock. His eyes kept looking at Yang Chendong. He found that the god of war was very young and had a scholarly aura. He didn't seem to know any martial arts at all. Was he really the god of war? He didn't know that Yang Chendong could hide his murderous aura under the nourishment of the qi. He had reached the realm of returning to his original state. Unless he wanted to let the other party know, otherwise, no one would be able to tell how much power was contained in his seemingly scholarly body just by looking at his appearance. There's no need to look. If you're talking about how I defeated the Walla, then I'm the war god you're talking about. Yang Chendong squinted his eyes and smiled. You are really the god of war, but they say that the god of war has 3 heads, 6 arms, a height of more than 1 zhang, and arms as thick as an ordinary person's thigh. Yi La spat out all the words he had heard in the rumors. Ha, ha, Yang Chendong couldn't help but laugh when he heard Yi La's description of himself. Not only that, but Tiger's Man, Beta Persei, and the others also laughed. They had been with the 6th young master for the longest time, so they naturally knew what kind of person the 6th young master was. After laughing for a while, Yang Chendong finally stopped laughing when he saw the doubt in Yi La's eyes getting heavier and heavier. He said, you're saying that I have 3 heads and 6 arms, right? But in fact, I am a very normal person, just like all of you. But you should also know that even if it is a legend, if it is not exaggerated, who would be willing to listen to it and believe it? In the last sentence, Yang Chendong told the truth. There was always no lack of exaggeration in history. It seemed that when you said that a person was very powerful, you had to exaggerate infinitely. This had become a law. But in fact, those famous people in history had only 1 head and 2 shoulders. Before they became famous, they were no different from ordinary people. Yi La also laughed at this time, but it was an awkward laugh. He was a smart person, but he was still misled. This was enough to show how powerful the legend was. Even he had to believe it. Seeing Yi La's forced smile, Yang Chendong casually waved his hand, indicating that he didn't want to talk about this topic anymore. He then said, I heard from Battalion Commander Su that you and the Nuzan cavalry you lead are very strong, but I don't know why you train so well. Don't say that this is your duty. This young master has already understood that your salary and some gray income is invested in the cavalry. This is not the duty and responsibility of a Qianhu. Yi La had already recovered from the shock. When he heard Yang Chendong's question, he bitterly smiled and said, before this, I was very confident in my cavalry. But after this battle, I can't say that they are very strong. I am now a captive. As for why I did this, I don't dare to lie. I was just used to being bullied and didn't want my descendants to be inferior. Well said. When Yang Chendong heard the last sentence, he didn't want his descendants to be inferior to others. Yang Chendong was quite emotional and cheered loudly. Of course, he wouldn't tell Yila that 100 years later in history, the Nuzan people were so powerful that they enslaved the entire Han people for 268 years. They truly fulfilled the fact that their descendants were not inferior and were even superior. Since he knew that the Nuzan people had ambitions and was met by Yang Chendong, of course, he had to strangle this ambition in the cradle. And for insurance, of course, it was best to take them in as his subordinates and keep a close eye on them. Yila, right? This duke wants to take you in as his subordinate. What do you think? Don't worry, under my command, the Nuzan people can live very freely. As long as they are obedient, they won't have to worry about food and clothing. Living a happy life is not a problem. Yang Chendong made a promise and stared at Ela's body. At this time, the Nuzan people were still very weak. Not to mention the Great Ming dynasty, they were even much weaker than the Mongols and Wala. Yang Chendong was willing to help them at this time. This was naturally what Yila wanted. Yila, who didn't know what the future would be like, was moved by these words. He was even more clear that if he didn't agree now, he, who was originally a captive, might not even have the chance to see the sun tomorrow. With a plop, Yila knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times to Yang Chendong. Yila is willing to lead the Nuzan people to submit to the Duke of Loyalty. I will not regret it until I die. The news of Yang Chendong leading a powerful mercenary army to destroy the Jiaoji and Lansong kingdoms in the south had already spread to the new Ergon city department. As a Qianhu, Yila had the right to know these things. In his heart, he didn't know how much he envied the strength of the mercenary army. Now that he had the chance to see Yang Chendong himself, he finally made the decision to submit. In his opinion, this decision was the right one. At least for now it was the right one. After accepting another general, Yang Chendong smiled happily. He didn't think that as soon as he revealed his aura, everyone would bow down to him. He was very clear that the reason why Yila submitted to him was because he saw that he was stronger than him. It could even be said that it was a temporary measure. But it didn't matter. Since he had already submitted, Yang Chendong was confident that he wouldn't let him leave again. If he had to say where his advantage was now, other than the unknown and mysterious warehouse, he should be left with money. With the foundation of Chichen City, there were so many novel things that were sold at high prices. There was even a price but no market. He never lacked money. With money, he could buy people's hearts. As long as he didn't do things that hurt people's hearts, it would be difficult for people who followed him to follow others. This thought flashed through his mind. Yila stood up and followed beside Yang Chendong, starting to patrol the camp together. This was also the first time Yila saw the strength of the 5-star army. When he found out that General Sun Hong's 10,000-strong Northern Ming army had been defeated and captured, and that not a single soldier had managed to escape from the battlefield, his face revealed an extremely shocked expression. Yila was also a proud person. The biggest characteristic of such a person was that he was conceited and didn't want to admit defeat. In his opinion, if he had enough military strength and wealth, he would definitely be able to win. At least, when facing an opponent with similar numbers, he would definitely not lose. However, he had to admit that no matter how conceited he was, if he wanted to use only 600 cavalry to face Sun Hong's 5,000 cavalry, 5,000 paces, he still didn't have the slightest chance of victory. Yang Chendong did it, although this was because he had more than 10,000 soldiers in his hands. However, on such an intense battlefield, to not let a single person escape and to absolutely seal off the news, this still shocked him. At the very least, it would be very difficult for him to do this. Seeing Yila's shock, Yang Chendong said with a smile, "There's no other way. I am the Duke of Loyalty personally conferred by the Baiming Emperor. It's best not to spread the news of me beating my own people." Yila couldn't help but tense up. That's right, this is the Duke of Baiming. However, even though you knew this, you still didn't hesitate to make a move. I'm afraid you already know what you are thinking in your heart. Of course, this was just a thought in his heart. Right now, Yila was still a prisoner. Although he said that he had surrendered, who knew if it was true or not? Since he was a newcomer, there were some things that couldn't be said carelessly. While patrolling the barracks, the two chatted. As they talked about the warhorse uniform. Yang Chendong didn't intend to hide anything. He said that he was very satisfied with the impenetrable armor and wanted to imitate it to make some. He also asked about some things that he should pay attention to. There was no secret about the warhorse uniform. This was something that anyone could make after accumulating a certain amount of wealth. It was just that most people didn't have the courage to do so. Yang Chendong wanted to make one, and this one alone was more than 100 sets. Yi La was shocked again, but at the same time, he couldn't help but think that this was what it meant to be rich. He didn't even know how much time it took to make a set of his own, but he did it just like that. It was good to be rich. This wasn't a secret to begin with, and he could use this opportunity to express his loyalty. Yi La said that he would look for the blacksmith in the army later and tell him some of the problems he would encounter when making the warhorse uniform. He would try his best to avoid some common mistakes and take fewer detours. Very good. Yang Chendong nodded approvingly. He looked at the barracks on the left and pointed casually. Let's go over there and take a look. Yi La, who was following beside Yang Chendong, naturally nodded in agreement. He only thought that Yang Chendong was showing off his strength and martial prowess, so he didn't think too much about it. However, when he entered the barracks, his expression was no longer as calm as before. At this moment, his face was full of shock. Of course, ever since he had followed Yang Chendong for less than an hour, he had been shocked so many times that he had probably forgotten how many times he had been shocked. Chapter 672. In Yella's line of sight, his clansman, Hu Lu, was sitting cross-legged on the ground with his back facing him. He was having a meeting with a few generals. Whether it was Yang Chendong or Yella, they had chosen a good vantage point. From here, they could not be seen by the other party and could also hear what they were saying. Therefore, Hu Lu and his men's words were clearly heard by them. Battalion commander, I just went to get a new saber. Heh. Don't even mention how sharp and tough that thing is. When I used my old saber to fight against it, it only lasted 6 hits before it broke. Battalion commander, I just used my merit to exchange for silver. After dividing it among the brothers, each of them can get at least 80 silvers. 80 silvers, battalion commander. If it was in the past, I wouldn't have dared to think that we could get so much from a single battle. Battalion commander, when I passed by our logistics carriage just now, I accidentally saw that there were still quite a few military uniforms there. We have already joined the 5-star army. Why don't you ask when you can distribute the military uniforms? The 3 divisions are all wearing the same uniform, and they look very spirited. Battalion commander, this battle was so satisfying and decisive. We didn't suffer any losses, and the merit points were exchanged in such a timely manner. Shouldn't you ask Regiment Commander Winchaser if our battalion should be the vanguard in the next battle? Battalion commander, Yella stood there like a fool. He realized that all he could hear were the soldiers discussing how great the results of this battle were and how they should perform better in the next battle. Some of them were so anxious that they couldn't help but speak the language of the Nuzanran. He could understand all of this. He also finally knew that the soldiers in this camp were all Nuzanran cavalry. This meant that he wasn't the first Nuzanran to join the 5-star army. Of course, Yella was a person with his own pride. He didn't care about this problem. However, the fact that his clansmen had joined the 5-star army, and from the looks of it, they were very sincere. This was far beyond his expectations. With his intelligence, he guessed that the army's predecessor was most likely Borte's troops in Narcissus town. Yilan naturally knew about Bort. Not only that, but he was also the backer of the Baiming army. Otherwise, the Sa-Cha River Guards and the Com garrison were not far from Narcissus town, so the Baiming army had never made things difficult for them. It was impossible to say that he did not contribute. Yila had even thought of accepting this army as his subordinates one day after they had been trained. Narcissus town wasn't the only Jurchen Knights without a designation. There were many of them in the vicinity, and they were of different sizes. Yi La was quietly observing them, waiting for the army to be strong enough and experienced enough before he would step forward to recruit them. If he wanted the Jurchen Knights to become strong and not be bullied by others, he couldn't do it alone. He needed the help of more knowledgeable people. He didn't expect that before he could decide whether to recruit the troops from Narcissus Town, they had already become a part of the 5-star army. Judging from their performance just now, they had completely integrated into the army. At the same time, they wanted to perform better in the next battle. This was what really stimulated him. He was also a Jurchen Knight, so he knew how proud the people of this race were. Unless the opponent's strength was boundlessly strong, how could they be so sincere? Could it be that the 5-star army was really that strong? Could it be that this great Ming war god who looked like he was in his early 20s was really a deity who had descended from the heavens and had the ability to command an army at such a young age? Suddenly, Yi La felt a weight on his shoulder. Out of instinct, Yi La wanted to fight back. However, no matter how hard he tried, the big hand remained unharmed. Even though he was drenched in cold sweat, he still couldn't do anything to the big hand. You should be able to tell that these people are also from the Jurchen tribe. Since you're here, let's go in and have a chat. If you have anything to say, you can find me at any time. Yang Chendong's voice was like a spring breeze as it traveled into Yi La's ears. Then, the large hand moved away, and Yi La felt that he could move again. She turned around and saw Yang Chendong striding away, surrounded by a group of people. For some reason, his back seemed to have become so tall and big at this moment. Wiping the cold sweat from his forehead, Yi La thought that it was fortunate that he chose to surrender. Otherwise, he was afraid that the big hand just now could have easily taken his life. Yi La suppressed the anxiety and panic in his heart. After adjusting his mood, he strode into the barracks. He wanted to see what kind of charm the 5-star army had that could make Hu Lu and the other tribesmen submit so sincerely and even be proud of becoming a member of the 5-star army. Tiger's Mane, who was beside Yang Chendong, had a constipated look on his face. He seemed to have something to say. If you have something to say, just say it. Looking at you like that, even I feel uncomfortable. This change naturally couldn't escape Yang Chendong's eyes, and he teased him. Hee, Tiger's Mane, have you been eating too much meat recently? Your poop is dry. Beta Persei couldn't help but tease him. As soon as he said this, Qiu Vi, Dao Xiao, and the others also looked like they wanted to laugh, but they didn't dare to. It was really uncomfortable to hold it in. Yang Chendong's authority was naturally inviolable. As the most trusted person by his side, Tiger's Mane's reputation was not something that anyone could joke about. Only Beta Persei knew when to joke and when to be serious. Get lost, your poop is dry. When Beta Persei said this, Tiger's Mane's face darkened, and he looked like he was about to beat someone up. Beta Persei was naturally not afraid. In terms of martial arts, he was no worse than Tiger's Mane. The two of them were on par. So this time, he puffed out his chest and looked like he was ready to fight if Tiger's Mane wanted to. Tiger's Mane had no choice but to turn his head and look at Yang Chendong, saying, "Young master, I have a feeling that this Yella is very scheming and doesn't seem to be sincere about surrendering." I know. Yang Chendong's footsteps did not stop, and he just nodded softly. Young master knows? This made Tiger's Mane have no choice but to stop what he was about to say. Originally, he just wanted to remind Yang Chendong not to be deceived by others' facades. After all, the young master was still young, and he had won many battles. Who knew if the word pride would appear in his heart? But now that he heard Yang Chendong say that he knew, Tiger's Mane immediately shut his mouth and stopped talking. Since the young master knew everything, what else did he have to say? Was he trying to trick him? Tiger's Mane did not continue, and Yang Chendong spoke instead. Of course, I know that Yella won't sincerely surrender so soon, but you have to have confidence in yourselves. What we can give is far beyond what the current Baiming can give. This is where our confidence lies. Believe me, even if Yella doesn't sincerely surrender now, the facts will slowly change him and let him make the right decision. Oh, by the way, thank you for your reminder. We can do more of this in the future. As long as you feel that something is wrong, you can make suggestions to me. Yang Chendong said in a polite manner, but he did not emphasize that he would not accept the opinions they put forward. After receiving Yang Chendong's thanks, Tiger's Mane was naturally flattered. "Young master, I dare not say that. This is what we should do. Ha ha." After Yang Chendong heard this, he patted Tiger's Mane's shoulder, then turned and strode back to his tent. At this moment, Yang Chendong suddenly understood what it meant to be lonely at the top. As he became stronger and stronger, his status also became higher and higher. Even people close to him like Tiger's Mane had to keep a certain distance from him. The ancients called the emperor Guren, which meant lonely. Now that he thought about it, it was true. Once one's position reached a certain point, one's every word and action would determine the future of many people, and even their life and death. At this time, one could not be affectionate. Otherwise, it would inevitably affect one's judgment and decision. "Guren?" Yang Chendong shook his head. He did not know how far he would go in the future. However, he clearly knew that he still had a long way to go. If he wanted to lead the Han people to the top of the world, there were still many things that he needed to do. If he wanted to achieve this goal, it would be very difficult to rely on the Han people alone. Thus, he would need the help of more people. If the female Taoist was willing to assist him, he wouldn't mind using her. After that, he would do his best to compensate her as much as possible. After all, many of them were born in the Han language, so they weren't outsiders. At worst, the Han people would be first, the Nuzan and the other races would be second, and the other foreigners would be third or fourth. In short, Yang Chendong was using his magnanimity to expand the strength of his army. He was working hard to achieve the great goal in his heart. Yang Chendong returned to the tent. After an hour, Tiger's Mane came to report that Yi La was outside the tent. "Please." Yang Chendong raised his head and put aside the Tatar intelligence report from the security bureau. The tent was opened from the inside, and Beta Persei accompanied Yi La in. In the tent, Yi La walked forward. When he was 7 or 8 steps away from Yang Chendong, he knelt down on one knee and said, "General Yi La greets the 6th young master." He did not call him the Duke of Loyalty, but changed to the 6th young master. From this, it could be seen that he should know a lot of things from Hulu, and also some of the rules in the camp. "Stand up and talk." Yang Chendong sat there, looking straight ahead with a calm expression. Chapter 673. "Thank you, 6th young master," Yi La said respectfully. Yi La respectfully said. Then he slowly stood up and lowered his head. His submissive appearance caused Hu Mang and Yang Er to curl their lips at the same time. Clearly, they did not quite believe that Yi La had become so respectful in such a short period of time. The corners of Yang Chendong's mouth curled up as he smiled bitterly. He looked at Yi La and asked, "How is it? Have you spoken to Hu Lu and your clansmen?" In response to 6th young master's question, "We've talked." Yi La replied respectfully, but his heart was already in turmoil. Ever since he entered the Nuzan tribe's camp, he had only seen and heard for less than an hour, but it had given him a huge shock. The originally arrogant clansmen were now full of admiration for Yang Chendong. Some of them even suggested that as long as they clung onto the 6th young master's thigh, once he became powerful, their Nuzan tribe's spring would come. When that time came, they would be able to completely change their oppressed state and obtain more power and freedom. It was fine if only one person said that, but when everyone said the same thing, including their general Hu Lu, Yi La couldn't help but feel terrified. How long had it been? It had only been slightly more than 10 days since they had returned without informing him that the 5 Astral Army had taken control of Narcissus Town. How did the Duke of Loyalty manage to change the hearts of these men? Judging others by his own standards, he thought that since Hu Lu and the others could be changed in a very short period of time, then would the 500 cavalry led by him and Lu Dai be infected sooner or later and become loyal to Yang Chendong? What would he do if that really happened? While he was feeling terrified, he was called to the side by Hu Lu. In the past, this person wasn't even qualified to meet his subordinates. Now, he was already a battalion commander in a 5-star army. With this status, Hu Lu was no longer afraid of Yi La. On the contrary, he was advising him earnestly. "General Yi, I already know that you were captured, but I didn't go to see you immediately. It wasn't because I was afraid of being affected, but because I wanted you to make the right decision. You should understand that only by following the sixth young master can we have a bright future. The descendants of the Nuzan tribe will definitely be proud of our choice today. Proud? Yi La shook his head in disagreement. What? Isn't General Yi only able to see us because you chose to surrender? Or are you just pretending to surrender and looking for a chance to leave? If it's the latter, I can only advise you that your decision is wrong, very wrong, because you have done a lot for the Nuzan of Narcissus Town in the past. There was no respect in Hulu's eyes. Instead, it was replaced by mockery, mocking Yi La's arrogance and ignorance. Wrong. Where did this come from? Don't you know that only freedom is true happiness? Although we Nuzan are weak, as long as several generations work together, it won't be long before we can fly freely like the eagles in the world. That's what we should be doing. Yella was also trying to convince Hulu. Hulu had a battalion of soldiers under his command. If he added his own men, he would be able to gather close to 1,000 men. If everyone swore an oath together, they would have a certain chance of killing their way out of here. Eagles? Would the eagle really be happy? Let's not talk about whether we Nuzan can have such a day. Even if we become eagles, won't we become the target of hunters? After so many years, how many eagles and gerfalcons have died at our hands? General Yi, let's face reality. The strength of the sixth young master is not something you can see through. If such a person is our friend, then it will be great. If he is our enemy, then it will be a nightmare for the Nuzan. In order to prevent this nightmare from coming true, surrendering is the best decision. After saying this, Hulu didn't wait for Yi La to refute and continued. General Yi, I don't know if you've thought about it, but if Baiming's army loses this battle and you provide the information, how will Baiming treat you in the future? If Baiming's army disappears and you're the only one left alive, how can they be satisfied? You have nowhere to go. Yi La originally wanted to continue arguing with Hulu, but after hearing Hulu's words, she became speechless. That's right. This time, Sun Hong and the others had received his intelligence before sending out their troops. Now that their commander had died in battle, and all the soldiers had been captured by the 5-star army, not a single one of them had escaped. If he escaped, how would he explain it? Yi La was still thinking about the serious consequences of this matter. Hulu opened his mouth again. So the only thing you can do now is to hold on to the sixth young master's thigh and leave here. Only if you disappear with the rest of the Baiming army, no one will suspect you. Otherwise, once you appear, it will be the biggest nightmare for the Nuzan people. Yi La wanted to say that he could explain to the Baiming army, but he thought that he was just a Qianhu. This time, the Baiming army lost so much that they needed a scapegoat. At this time, no one would listen to him. In order to shirk their responsibility, they would definitely hand him over. At that time, it would be hard to argue. Not only that, even if he died, he would have to bear the name of the Baiming army. In order to take revenge, the Nuzan people would be implicated. It should be said that they would definitely be implicated. In this short period of time, Yi La had thought of many things. For example, since he couldn't go back, he might as well do it alone. If he couldn't do it in the Dusi area, then he could go to the territory occupied by Vala and the Mongols. However, when he thought about how much resources an army would need to travel thousands of miles, how much would they need? Without enough strength, what would happen if they encountered a strong enemy with only a few hundred people? Once these problems appeared, he had to reject them one by one. After thinking about it, it seemed that there was only one conclusion. That was that staying in the 5-star army was the best plan. Reality forced Yi La to face this problem. Seeing that Yi La seemed to have understood, Hulu suggested, General Yi, I know that Water Fairy Town is not the only town under your protection. There are other towns nearby and even some bandits who have taken over the mountains. You're also supporting them, aren't you? If that's the case, you can lead them to the 5-star army. As long as these people are capable and the 6th young master can see it, then you won't be far from success. At that time, you will become a great general and have power. Our Nuzan people will also benefit from your glory. As for which path to take, General Yi, please reconsider. Hu Lu had already said what he needed to say. If Yi La still couldn't think it through, then there was nothing he could do. Even with Hu Lu's IQ, he could see these things clearly, not to mention Yella, who was much smarter than him. After he figured it out, he came to see Yang Chendong. At this time, whether it was in terms of attitude or mentality, he was much more respectful. This was his only hope, and he had to grab hold of it. At this moment, Yi Wei was standing in front of Yang Chendong in the tent. His entire aura had changed. Yang Chendong could feel the respect that came from the bottom of his heart. Since we're done talking, what do you plan to do next? Yang Chendong knew that Yi La must have been influenced by Hu Lu, but he was still curious about what Yi La would do. Sixth young master, do you still lack soldiers? How many people can the army support with the provisions and equipment? Yi La didn't immediately say what he was going to do next. Instead, he asked these questions in an inquiring tone. He was waiting for Yang Chendong to give him an answer. Unexpectedly, as soon as he said this, Tiger, Mane and Beta Persei beside him shouted at the same time, Yi La, isn't this something you can inquire about? What do you want to do? Stand down. Yang Chendong said, casually waving his hand and ordering Generals Heng and Ha to stand down. Then, he looked at Yi La thoughtfully, as if he had already thought of something. Of course we lack manpower, but what we lack are all experienced elites. If it's just ordinary soldiers, then forget it. As for provisions and equipment, you don't have to worry about them. As long as they are elites, you can take as many as you have. This time, they were fighting a battle away from the sea. It was far from being like fighting Jiaoji and Kanglin Kingdom, where they could rely on the sea to provide logistical support at any time. Fortunately, they had just defeated Baiming's army of more than 10,000 and snatched a lot of good things from their hands. It was enough for the army to last for a while. As for the future, Yang Chendong wasn't worried. If they ran out of supplies, they could rob. Whether it was Baiming, Walla, or the Mongolian army, they could all become his granaries. This was where his confidence came from. As long as he had enough strength, he would open up a supply route and directly provide military supplies from the sea. Okay. Yang Chendong really answered him. Yi La sighed in his heart and at the same time, he knelt on the ground again. In that case, this sinful general is willing to recruit soldiers for the sixth young master. There are more than 10 forces that I secretly support near the Cha River. They are all led by the Nuzan, and there are many experienced elites. This sinful general is willing to bring them to the sixth young master and let them join the 5-star army to help the sixth young master succeed. From then on, the Nuzan are willing to respect the sixth young master and protect and survive. In just a few words, Yi La not only put his own life and future on the line, but also the Nuzan people that he could influence. It had to be said that he was very bold. Chapter 674. Sure enough, Yang Chendong nodded his head. Just as he thought, Yi La placed a heavy bet and wanted to pull the Jinren into his war chariot. All of this was actually not beyond his expectations. After all, the Jinren would only become powerful more than 100 years later. At this time, the Ming dynasty, Mongolia, and Walla people could easily bully them. This was also equivalent to forcing them to become stronger. It was just that their strength in the future was somewhat beyond people's expectations. After a slight hesitation in his heart, Yang Chendong immediately agreed. At this time, he wanted to establish a foundation in the grassland where heroes were vying for supremacy. He also needed a large number of elite cavalry. Combining with the Jinren would be beneficial to both sides. There was no reason for him to refuse. Good, this young master agrees. This time, Yang Chendong did not use his title, which meant that he really accepted Yi La's proposal in his heart. Thank you, sixth young master. Yi La excitedly raised his head. Although he believed that no one would refuse his proposal before he came, when Yang Chendong agreed, he could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. For hours later, Yi La left. He only brought a dozen or so personal guards with him as he left the military camp. There was also a large amount of silver on the back of his horse. According to the agreement between him and Yang Chendong, They only had 10 days at most to recruit soldiers and buy horses. After all, after a long time, the disappearance of the 10,000 Baiming army could not be concealed. At that time, if they did not leave, they might be pestered endlessly. Yang Chendong's goal was not the Baiming army's guard station in the new Ergon Dusi area. He would not waste too much time and energy here. Not long after Yila left, Yang Chendong issued 2 orders. First, the scouts were sent out to control the surrounding 20 li. Once they discovered the Baiming army scouts, regardless of whether they were captured or killed, they were to create a vacuum and buy 10 days for Yila. Second, the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, led by Lu Zhua, would be the vanguard to cross the Liao River first and enter the eastern Tatar region along the Ulugu River. At the same time, they would find a suitable place for the army to settle down and make preparations for the army's advance. The reason why the 2nd Cavalry Regiment was chosen was that there was a higher proportion of Mongolian cavalry in this army. With the 3rd Battalion Commander Teimu as the vanguard of the vanguard, if anything happened, there would be more room to maneuver. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment and scouts were sent out. While waiting for Yi La's news, the army was digesting the results of the previous battle. There were more than 6,000 captives. How to deal with them had become a problem that needed to be solved. In the past, they would have sent them all to be sent to Chiu to be sent to be sent to be dealt. However, from where they were now, it was extremely difficult to send all 6,000 of them to the seaside. In between, they would have to pass through many Baiming city guards, so it was basically impossible to do it without anyone noticing. Choose the brave ones to join the army. As for the others, arrange them to be logistics and drive carriages. Yang Chendong shook his head with a headache. He looked at the 3rd Division Commander Wu Sheng and Political Commissar Chen Bo. The strength of the Baiming army was uneven, and it was impossible to absorb all of them into the army. Otherwise, once the battle started, they would be affected by the enemy's morale. If they fled or even changed sides, they would be the ones at a disadvantage. 6th Young Master, do you want to give the qualified soldiers horses? Chen Bo asked. Although they had obtained many war horses in this battle, if each person was given one, it would not be enough. No need. Those who used to be cavalry, we will arrange them according to their strength. Those who are not cavalry, we will arrange for them to be infantry. How about this? We will form 10 infantry battalions and let Tiger's Man's independent regiment lead them. Yang Chendong shook his head. Resources must be used wisely. If they were not cavalry, they would not be able to display their strength. He wanted elite soldiers, not quantity. Understood. Wu Sheng and Chen Bo nodded and went to make the arrangements. Yang Chendong, who was left behind, looked at Tiger's Man and coughed lightly. When we go back, break up the auxiliary battalions and let them lead the new Baiming army. Let's hope they can form a fighting force as soon as possible. Yes, young master, don't worry. I will arrange it immediately. Tiger's Man nodded solemnly. The burden on his shoulders was heavier, so naturally his responsibility was heavier. This was the young master's way of tempering himself. He had to use this opportunity to perform well. The barracks were bustling with activity. The Baiming prisoners were all broken up and began to participate in all kinds of tests. In the end, under the leadership of Tiger's Man, Wu Sheng and Chen Bo, a total of 1,200 cavalry soldiers and 4,000 infantry soldiers were recruited. The remaining 1,000 soldiers were transferred to the logistics department to be responsible for cooking and driving carriages because of their physical fitness. The 600 cavalry soldiers were all added to the reinforced cavalry regiment led by Winchase. There were still 3 battalions, but each battalion was in charge of 10 companies. They were completely reinforced battalions. The 4,000 infantry soldiers were broken up into 10 battalions and added to Tiger's Man's independent regiment. This regiment also reached the level of a division, with a total of 16 battalions and 6,400 soldiers. The logistics battalion was led by Beta Persei. 10 companies, a total of 1,000 soldiers. This allowed Beta Persei to satisfy his desire to be a general in advance. The Baiming prisoners were divided up and entered a period of adjustment. At this time, It had been 9 days since Yila left. In the afternoon, a group of 2,000 cavalry soldiers appeared outside the barracks. The commander was Yila, who had left not long ago. He had already heard from the scouts that Yila had returned. Yang Chendong personally went out to welcome him. What he saw was a group of soldiers coming from afar, but they were filled with a strong killing intent. As expected of the Nuzan cavalry. Just by looking at their posture, I can tell that their strength is not ordinary. Yang Chendong sighed. Yila had returned with the silver that Yang Chendong had given him as a settlement fee. He had brought 2,500 cavalry soldiers with him. These people were finally divided into Yila's command. Together with the 500 soldiers that had been captured, a total of 3,000 soldiers formed the Nuzan cavalry regiment. Yang Chendong now had more than 20,000 soldiers. Apart from 5,000 or so infantrymen, the rest were all cavalry. His strength had nearly doubled compared to before. This gave him more confidence in entering the Tatar and Wala region. That was not the only good news. Over the past 9 days, Wu Hua had been forging the chainmail day and night. He had led over 100 blacksmiths to forge the chainmail for more than 10 warhorses. The moment the white dragon horse was covered by the chainmail, it was incomparably majestic. Tell Wu Hua and the others that when the army is on the road, they can rest in the carriages. When the army stops, they can start the furnace and continue forging. Try to put the armor on the warhorses of the 1st and 2nd guards as soon as possible. Looking at the armor that was shining with a black light, Yang Chendong said boldly, "Order the army to rest today. Tomorrow, we will set off for the Wulagu River." Above the sea, it was a deep blue. It looked boundless, and it gave people a sense of mystery and terror. An extremely ordinary transport ship was sailing toward Japan under the protection of more than 10 warships. On the deck of the transport ship, a large tarpaulin stood there. Around it were hundreds of Japanese soldiers guarding, not allowing anyone to get close. No one knew what kind of powerful weapon was hidden under the tarpaulin. This was the most advanced cannon that Japan had purchased through Princess Ohara Junko and the great Ming Dynasty's Duke of Zhongdan for 10 million taels of silver, the Type 59-1 130mm cannon, which was equipped with an explosive bomb, range of 30 kilometers. The agreement had been reached a long time ago, but it was not until a year later that the deal was made. It was not because Emperor Hirohito had any concerns, but because he had limited money. However, he couldn't let Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa find out about this. Under the situation where he couldn't openly raise money everywhere, and even under the situation where he couldn't use the national treasury, it took him a full year to gather all the money. And this was the result of Emperor Yanin secretly selling 2 of his imperial properties. Finally, he had enough money. Next, he arranged for his trusted minister Hirai and the former captain of Princess Junko's guard, Kobayashi, to go to the sea to trade with the mercenaries. Fortunately, the trade went smoothly. However, when they saw the Type 59-1 cannon on the transport ship, both Hirai and Kobayashi were shocked by the size of the cannon. It exuded a cold aura, like a steel work of art. The two of them could not help but click their tongues in amazement. After paying the money, Hirai and Kobayashi suppressed the excitement in their hearts and escorted the transport ship back to Japan. The wind was blowing. A storm was about to engulf them, unstoppable. Tide Sea, Belik, Blue Bone River, Saihan Mountain, Tatar, Wala, Mongolian. The vast area that belonged to them seemed to be either mountains or seas. Other than seas, there was only vast grassland. Yendu, also known as Lingjichuan in the Ming Dynasty, was a large town in the eastern part of Tatar. At this time, 400 miles east of Yendu, Yang Chendong led the main force along the Wulu Bone River to meet up with Lu Zhua's 2nd Cavalry Regiment, who was the vanguard. The so-called Tatar or Tatar was a general term used by different regions and eras for different nomadic tribes that appeared in the Eurasian steppe. It was not a specific ethnic group. In East Asia, it was first seen in the Tang Dynasty Turkic inscriptions and some Chinese records. It was translated as Darg, Tatan, Tatar, 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 and Dada. The scope of its reference varied from era to era. In the Liao and Jin dynasties, it referred to the Tatars in the east of the Mongolian steppe. In the Ming dynasty, it referred to the Tatar regime established in the east of the Mongolian steppe. In Europe, it was first used to refer to the Bulgars, and later became a general term used by Russia to refer to the Turkic peoples in the Eurasian steppe. Tatar was also a name used by outsiders to refer to Mongolia. The name Tatar came from the 9 surnames of the Mongolian steppe. Chapter 675. To be specific, the Tatars were the Mongolians who spoke the Turkic language. In fact, after Genghis Khan conquered the Tatars, the Turkic-speaking Tatars migrated to the west. Now, the remaining Tatars were not that authentic. To describe it in 2 sentences, Diyuan was destroyed by the Ming dynasty and became Northern Yuan. Finally, it became Tatar. Tatar was a part of Mongolia and was ruled by the Golden family. The powerful Mongolia was divided into 3 parts. One was Tatar, the second was Wala, and the third still called themselves Mongolia. 15,000 cavalrymen and 5,000 infantrymen began to set up camp. Yang Chendong only had a vague impression of this place. All he knew was the intelligence sent by the security bureau. In the big tent, Lu Zhua, who had arrived first, was called in. Together with him was the commander of the 3rd Battalion, Tai Mu. "How is it? How much do you know about the situation?" "6th young master, please come to the sand table." Lu Zhua had arrived 10 days earlier with the army. He more or less grasped the situation. At least, he knew the situation of the surrounding enemies very well. In front of the sand table, Lu Zhua seriously reported the surrounding situation in detail. For example, the nearest city, Yendu, belonged to the Tatars. The general in charge was called Mu Ren. He had 3,000 cavalrymen and 2,000 infantrymen. Further away was Haramanglai, also known as the civil and martial town by Baiming. There were only 200 to 300 Tatars there. In the end, Lu Zhua also said that if they wanted to know more about the enemy, they had to go deeper into the grassland. In such a place, it was normal to not see any signs of human habitation, towns, or villages for hundreds of miles. 3,000 cavalrymen and 2,000 infantrymen? That's not interesting. Don't touch them first. Let's observe the situation first. Send out the reconnaissance team. As for the other soldiers, don't wait in vain. Since we've entered the grassland, we can train the soldiers. Yang Chendong knew that without enough strength, one wrong step could cause irreparable losses. Therefore, it was better to stay still. After traveling for more than 10 days, the army stopped and rested in this nameless grassland. Be it the cavalry or the infantry, under the leadership of the battalion commanders, they began to practice their cooperation and joint attacks. Among them, Division Commander Wu Sheng and Division Commander Chen Bo had sent the soldiers of the 3 divisions of the Cold Front Division to various units to train them on how to use and implement the 3-3 tactic. Once they mastered it, it would greatly improve the combat ability of the army, especially when used in small units. The army had started training, and even Tiger's Mane was busy with the matters of the independent regiment. The only one who was really free was Beta Persei, who was beside Yang Chendong. Although Beta Persei also had a position as the battalion commander of the logistics battalion, the military quality of the soldiers in the logistics battalion was too poor. After trying a few times, Beta Persei was completely disappointed. He simply let them practice their cooking skills and serve everyone well. Beta Persei returned to Yang Chendong's side as he didn't want to deal with pots and pans every day. Coincidentally, Wu Hua and the others had finished making more than 100 sets of warhorse chainmail. The overjoyed Yang Chendong decided to go out and train to see how effective it would be. After a long journey, the speed of the warhorse would be greatly affected. The 2 guard squads, Yang Chendong, Beta Persei and the others majestically rode out of the camp on their black warhorses. They galloped all the way north, leaving behind the endless envy of the officers in the camp. Unfortunately, there were no extra materials in the camp. Wu Hua had said that if they wanted the chainmail, they could go to the battlefield and seize it. Naturally, he could make it into finished products and give it to everyone. Ignoring the envious gazes of the people behind him, Yang Chendong rode the white dragon horse and rushed out of the camp. He ran for 50 li and just happened to see a small stream in front of him. Looking from afar, the water plants here were very exuberant. It was a good place to graze horses. Stop. Everyone is free to move around. Although he knew that 50 miles was not the limit of the warhorse, especially the white dragon horse under him. Running this distance was like playing, but considering that these warhorses were wearing chainmail for the first time, they still needed to adapt to it. Yang Chendong called for a rest. Of course, the rest of the guards didn't stop. The warhorses had just gotten black battle suits, and it was time for them to get used to each other. After all, no one knew when the war would come. Now, there was time for them to run on the vast land. Other than the necessary guards, the rest of the guards continued to whip their horses and shout non-stop. The stream gurgled, the blue sky above his head, and the fresh air in his nose. It was like a beautiful scenery in a painting, making Yang Chendong intoxicated. Taking advantage of this rest time, he simply lay on the grassland with a piece of green grass in his mouth. He closed his eyes and hummed a song that did not belong to this era. He was extremely leisurely. Seeing that the sixth young master was so elegant, Beta Persei's face was also filled with joy. He quickly arranged for people to spread out the things they brought. It was a large blanket about 5 square meters, a large umbrella that could cover several people, and a small wooden table that could be folded and carried. There was also a tea set and a fruit plate. It was really difficult for Beta Persei to arrange for people to bring these things when they were outside. It seemed that the sixth young master's title of the head of the guards was not for nothing. It was June noon, and the sun in the sky was hot. With this umbrella, it was much cooler. Beta Persei, who had prepared everything, smiled and invited Yang Chendong to move under the umbrella. Not bad. Yang Chendong took off his military leather shoes and relaxed his body. He half sat on the blanket and drank a mouthful of herbal tea. The feeling was so comfortable that he could not help but want to doze off. A light horse galloped over from afar, breaking Yang Chendong's beautiful dream of taking a nap. It was the second guard captain, Dao Xiao. Sixth young master, brothers report that there are 2 light horses approaching us at high speed. Do you want to? Dao Xiao made a beheading gesture. As the guard captain, his duty was to ensure the absolute safety of the sixth young master. Anyone who could threaten his safety must die. No need. Let's see who they are first. Yang Chendong gently waved his hand. He was confident that he had come here today on a whim. No one could know his whereabouts in advance. Besides, there were only 2 people. Even experts like Li Min and Shen Kun could not hurt him. What was there to be afraid of? Or perhaps he could understand the situation here from the 2 people here. How about this? Arrange for the brothers to hide. Don't let the people here see you. Otherwise, no matter what the other party's purpose is, I'm afraid they won't easily reveal themselves. Beta Persei, Ba Daojiang and Pengyu, stay behind. Everyone else, go. After some thought, Yang Chendong added. The sixth young master opened his mouth. This was an order. Dao Xiao agreed and retreated. As he continued to make gestures, the surrounding guards in charge of security and safety disappeared one by one. Only Yang Chendong and the other 3 were left. Among the 4, Ba Daojiang and Pengyu were on Yang Chendong's left and right. They did not look sideways, but their attention was very focused to ensure that no matter what happened in this area, nothing could escape their eyes. Beta Persei stood behind Yang Chendong. His tall body and sturdy physique gave off an invisible pressure. He was like a human-shaped tank, standing upright. Finally, they looked at Yang Chendong. His body was half lying down, and his whole body was in a lazy state. His eyes were half closed, as if he had fallen asleep. He was very comfortable. However, no one knew that even if his eyes were closed, as long as Yang Chendong wanted to, he could still sense everything that was happening around him. As long as he wanted, even the slightest change in his surroundings could not escape his senses. Dad-ada. Just as the guards found a place to hide, the sound of horse hooves came from the puddle next to the stream. Beta Persei's soft voice also came from Yang Chendong's side. It's really 2 people and 2 horses, but they're all wearing black cloaks, so I can't see what they look like. It's okay. It's fine if they don't come over, but if they do, don't stop them. Yang Chendong's eyes were still closed, but Beta Persei's ears could still be heard clearly by Yang Chendong. The speed of a healthy horse had always been extremely fast. Just now, they had only heard the sound of hooves. In just a short while, the 2 horses were already in front of them. It seemed that they did not want to stay here, but when they saw that there were other people in the puddle, the leading horse suddenly reared up. After a neigh, it forced itself to stop. The horses suddenly stopped, and their target was the 6th young master. Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu could not help but tense their bodies, and their right hands casually reached for the sabers at their waists. It was only 2 against 2, so they did not need to use their spears at all. They were confident that they would not lose with just their sabers. A crisp female voice sounded, and then a voice like water and a song came from under the black cloak. Everyone, leave this place immediately. There will be danger here in a while, so please leave quickly. After saying this, the woman did not even have the intention to lift her cloak, and she urged her horse to leave. However, the horse that she was riding had only taken a few steps forward before it suddenly stopped. She then pointed at the horse and asked, "Is that your horse?" Looking at the direction of the cloak's finger, who else could it be but the white dragon horse? The white dragon horse was eating water plants by the stream. It seemed to have sensed something and raised its head to look at the cloaked woman. Then, very humanly, it snorted disdainfully. The white dragon horse used to be a wild horse. Even after it was caught, no one could tame it except for Yang Chendong. If it was not for Yang Chendong's monstrous strength, it would probably still be in the stable now. Chapter 676. Only Yang Chendong was able to tame it. How could it look at anyone else? It seemed that after following Yang Chendong, it had become even more arrogant. Usually, other than the people who specially fed it, only a limited number of people like Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei could get close to it. Now that it was pointed at by a woman it did not know, of course it would show disdain. Yang Chendong, who had been sitting on the blanket with his eyes narrowed, only treated the 2 people who suddenly appeared as passers-by. If the other party was willing to stay and chat with him, he would not mind opening his mouth to see if he could find out some information from them. On the other hand, if the other party was just passing by, he would not ask them to stay. With the people he had spread out, would he still be worried about not understanding the situation here? He still had this little bit of pride. But now, the person who came seemed to have taken a fancy to his horse, so he could not help but speak. "That is this young master's horse." "Your horse?" Looking at Yang Chendong who answered, the cloaked woman nodded. "Very good, name your price, I want it." She said the words "I want it" so naturally, as if it was a matter of course, as if she was talking about an extremely ordinary matter. "Not for sale." Yang Chendong's answer was simple and straightforward. After he finished speaking, he simply closed his eyes and had an expression as if he was taking a nap. "I offer 200 taels." The woman did not seem to hear Yang Chendong's answer and offered a good price. Previously, it was said that an ordinary horse was around 10 to 15 taels, while a better war horse could be sold for 80 to 150 taels. Now that she offered 200 taels, it was not considered bullying. "Not for sale for 2 million taels." Yang Chendong snorted. He had taken a fancy to the white dragon horse, and he had tamed it. These days, both sides got along well and had already developed feelings for it. He was not joking when he said that he would not sell it for 2 million taels. When the cloaked woman heard the same words, she thought that the cloaked woman was making fun of her. She said angrily, "Whatever this young lady fancies is mine. I'll give you a chance now. Take the 200 taels and leave. Otherwise, I'm afraid you won't be able to bear the consequences. Bao Yin pay up." As soon as the voice of the cloaked young lady faded, the cloaked man on the sturdy horse behind her had already taken out 200 taels of silver from his bosom. A package that was more than 6 kilograms was thrown over 1 meter in front of Yang Chendong and the other 3. "How dare you!" Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu shouted in unison when they saw that the bag of silver had landed a meter away from them. If it moved any further, It might threaten the safety of the sixth young master. They pulled out their cavalry sabers. Beta Persei widened his eyes and clenched his fists. If it wasn't for the fact that the sixth young master was by his side and didn't give any orders, he would have already rushed out. On the other hand, Yang Chendong didn't open his eyes from beginning to end. It was as if the money wasn't for him and had nothing to do with him. You guys still want to fight? Bao Yin, it's time for you to show off. The cloaked young lady laughed when she saw Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu's actions. It was as if she had seen something that interested her. When the cloaked man heard the young lady's order, he sighed and said, "Young lady, don't. We'll just give them the money. There's no need to fight. We still have important things to do." No, they made this young lady unhappy. I have to teach them a lesson. Bao Yin, is it because your strength has regressed and you're afraid? The cloaked young lady said unyieldingly. She even turned her head back on her horse, as if she was asking something. I'll teach them a lesson, but I won't hurt them. The man called Bao Yin seemed to have given in after being stared at by the cloaked young lady. Then he jumped down from his horse and reached out his right hand to take off the cloak on his head, revealing a harmless face. He had the typical appearance of a Mongolian and was a little handsome. Of course, the most eye-catching thing about him was that he always had a smile on his face, which gave people a natural sense of closeness. "Gentlemen, I'm sorry. My young lady likes wild horses and it's fair to pay the money. Why don't you sell it? Otherwise, if you fight, won't it hurt everyone's friendship?" It was a completely negotiating tone. It didn't seem like the legendary Mongolians who would start a fight if they didn't agree with each other. This attracted Yang Chendong's attention. "What's your name? Bao Yin, right? If I'm not wrong, Bao Yin means fortune in Chinese. It's very fitting for a person like you. Since you're so polite, we shouldn't bully you too much. Ba Daojiang, you go. Remember, just defeat him. Don't hurt him." Just like the cloaked young lady, Yang Chendong said casually, as if he didn't take Bao Yin's threat seriously. Ba Daojiang, who was called out, immediately responded and strode towards Bao Yin. From the looks of it, he didn't have any intention of drawing his sword. He was going to use his hands to fight. Of course, Ba Daojiang's strongest skill was his fists. When Bao Yin heard Yang Chendong talking about the situation so casually and saw someone walking towards him, he was stunned by the change in the situation. He then smiled and scratched his head. "Young master, are you sure you won't come at me together? If that's the case, you won't stand a chance." "It's fine. I have confidence in my brother." Yang Chendong chuckled. However, when Ba Daojiang heard this, he couldn't help but feel shocked. The young master treated him as a brother and trusted him so much. Just based on this, he couldn't embarrass himself. Ba Daojiang focused all his energy on his arms and decided to perform well. He didn't want to let down the sixth young master's trust. "All right." Seeing that Yang Chendong had made up his mind, Bao Yin nodded reluctantly. He then looked at Ba Daojiang and said, "Brother, we're just sparring. Let's not hurt each other's feelings. What do you say?" He sounded like he was asking, or he was trying to get close to Ba Daojiang, or he was showing weakness. However, after saying this, Bao Yin suddenly moved. He, who was acting like a nice guy just a moment ago, suddenly pounced on Ba Daojiang like a hungry wolf. As he dashed forward, the sound of something breaking through the air was heard, bringing with it a strong pressure. Good timing. Ba Daojiang, who was prepared for Bao Yin's sudden change, was not caught off guard. When he saw Bao Yin pouncing on him, he raised his hand and threw a punch. He accurately aimed at Bao Yin's chest. Ba Daojiang remained calm and did not panic at all. Bao Yin saw this and a look of surprise appeared on his face. In the past, he was used to showing weakness to his enemies. When his opponents were at their most relaxed, he would suddenly attack and catch them off guard. This move had always worked. Anyone who wasn't familiar with him would fall for it. Bao Yin was sure that this was the first time he had seen these four people. Judging from their attire, they should be Han people. Even if they did not know him well, how could they be so calm and see through his trick? This thought flashed through Bao Yin's mind. Then Ba Daojiang's long fist came. Bao Yin also felt the sound of something breaking through the air. He did not dare to be careless. He quickly retracted his hand that was about to grab his opponent and threw a punch at the incoming fist. Bang! The two fists collided due to Bao Yin's sudden change in tactics. After this attack, Ba Daojiang only took half a step back. Bao Yin took 3 steps back before he could stabilize himself. His face was as red as blood. Obviously, this punch had caused his blood to boil. He must have suffered some internal injuries. With just one punch, the winner was decided. After 2 breaths, Bao Yin's expression returned to normal. He then shouted, "So powerful, so powerful. I can't beat him. Miss, I can't beat him. You and the rest of you." The cloaked woman saw everything. Because of this, she knew that Bao Yin was not lying. She had thought that Bao Yin would be able to take on 10 people at the same time, let alone 4 people at the same time. Who would have thought that the 4 people she had randomly met would be so powerful that they could defeat Bao Yin with just one blow? Who are these people? Under the cover of the cloak, no one could see the change in the woman's expression. However, from the way her delicate body swayed on the horse, it was obvious that she was shocked. "Who are you people? Did Hararuo send you to stop us?" After an unknown period of time, the cloaked woman finally opened her mouth to speak. However, anyone could hear that her voice was trembling and filled with fear. "Hararuo? Who is he?" Yang Chendong only felt that the name sounded familiar. However, he was sure that he did not know this person. Therefore, he simply shook his head. "You were not sent by Hararuo to stop us?" The cloaked woman asked again, seemingly in disbelief. Sigh. Yang Chendong, who was sitting on the blanket, shook his head helplessly. "I say, which eye of yours saw us stop you here? It was clearly you who took a fancy to my horse and wanted to take it away. Of course, if you don't believe me, you can leave now. See if anyone will stop you." Yang Chendong looked at the cloaked woman as if she was an idiot. He really did not know what kind of intelligence this woman possessed. Her imagination was too infinite. Once the matter was exposed, the cloaked woman closed her mouth. She clearly knew that she had misunderstood the other party. Behind her, Bao Yin rolled his eyes and nodded. "Yes, this young master and the other heroes. We have misunderstood you. I am sorry. How about this, we will leave now. Leave now." Chapter 677. As he spoke, Bao Yin returned to his horse and leaped onto it. But before he could urge his horse to leave, the cloaked woman's voice rang out again. "Yes, we misunderstood you. We are indeed being chased. Now that you have seen us, please swear to the longevity heaven that no matter who asks you, you will not say that you have seen us here. Then we will turn around and leave. How about it?" Although he was sure that Yang Chendong and the other 3 were not here to stop him, but considering that the pursuers were not far away, would they betray him if they found him? If that was the case, how could he escape from the pursuers? No, this young master is not used to swearing. Yang Chendong shook his head and added casually, "All right, since there are pursuers behind us, why don't you leave quickly? Do you really want to stay here and let them catch up to you?" Yang Chendong was chasing them away, but the more he did so, the more the cloaked woman felt that something was wrong. "No, you have to swear. Otherwise, you will definitely betray us." "Do you have a persecutory delusion?" Seeing that the cloaked woman was so persistent, Yang Chendong could not help but say, What do you mean by a persecutory delusion? What are you trying to say?" The cloaked woman's hearing was good, so she heard everything clearly. Because of this, she wanted to know more. This time, before Yang Chendong could answer, another rider came from the side of the small valley. The rider was the captain of the 1st Guard Squad, Chiu Vi. When he was 10 meters away from Yang Chendong, he had already dismounted and saluted. "Sixth young master, there are 300 riders moving in our direction. Do you think we should move first?" "No need." Yang Chendong shook his head and looked at the cloaked woman and Bao Yin. "This should be the pursuers. It has nothing to do with us. Just be careful." Chiu Vi saluted again and left on his horse. From the moment he appeared to the moment he left, it was as if he had never been here. But now, no one cared about Chiu Vi's appearance. Bao Yin, who had been smiling, finally showed a trace of nervousness. He looked at the cloaked woman and said, "Young miss, they have caught up. Let's leave this place first." "No, they haven't sworn an oath yet. If we leave now, they'll know where we went when they catch up with us." The cloaked woman shook her head stubbornly. This Bao Yin looked like she was in a difficult position. She then looked at Yang Chendong and said, "Mister, I can tell that you are a good person. Why don't you make an oath? After all, you won't lose anything. What do you think?" "Oh, is this a good person card?" Yang Chendong smiled and shook his head. "The young master has said that I don't like to make oaths. So, don't even think about it. Let me give you a piece of advice. Leave immediately. Otherwise, you won't have another chance." "Yes, we won't have another chance." The cloaked woman suddenly said as she looked at the stream in front of her. Following the direction she was looking at, they could clearly see that the water in the stream was rippling. This was the tremor caused by the arrival of a large group of war horses. Everyone had been around horses since they were young. The Mongolians were known as the people who lived on horseback. They knew a lot about horses. Naturally, they knew that when there was a tremor on the ground, the distance between the two parties was very close. Perhaps they could still leave now, but Yang Chendong did not promise not to reveal their whereabouts. So, if they escaped now, as long as they chased in the right direction, it would be easy to catch up with them. Since that was the case, they might as well not leave. After all, the other party did not have the intention to kill them. They just wanted to capture them. As for Yang Chendong and the other three, they did not sell their horses first and did not promise not to reveal their whereabouts. Based on these 2 points, they should be punished. In an instant, the cloaked woman seemed to have thought of many things. Then, she suddenly got off her horse and walked towards Yang Chendong under the umbrella. As she walked, the woman took off the cloak on her head. When she walked in front of Yang Chendong, her appearance was completely revealed to everyone. This was a woman with an oval face. Her eyes were very big, her nose was very high, and her mouth was as small as a cherry. Her skin was very white. It was unknown how she took care of her skin. She did not get tanned even after riding on horseback every day. Of course, what caught Yang Chendong and the men's attention the most was that the woman's breasts were very high, which also became her biggest feature. When everyone looked at her, they couldn't help but look there first. Yang Chendong was no exception. He had seen many women in his previous life, but she was definitely the first one with such a huge chest. It was so big that it was a little unbalanced. Yang Chendong thought maliciously. Would he fall down while riding on his horse? At this moment, the girl had already arrived in front of Yang Chendong. Seeing that his gaze was fixated on her, she couldn't help but let out a prideful laugh. She shook her head and her long black hair fell down her neck. She didn't stand on ceremony and sat down beside Yang Chendong. She even reached out for the exquisite teacup and poured the tea into her mouth. The woman was so open that Yang Chendong finally retracted his gaze. "Hey, I said that's my teacup. I didn't dislike you. What are you yelling for?" The woman pouted. She didn't even say anything. How could a man like you have the nerve to yell here? Yang Chendong, who wanted to say something, could only swallow his words back into his stomach. He took out another teacup from under the table and drank by himself. When the woman saw that Yang Chendong was ignoring her, she wasn't angry. On the contrary, her eyes revealed a sly smile. She pointed at the large umbrella above her head. "Hey, I say, you are really relaxed. There's a blanket on the ground, a large umbrella above your head, and you are drinking tea while looking at the scenery. You are really comfortable. But what are you looking at? There's nothing in front of you except for this small stream. There can't be any underground treasure here, right?" The woman took the initiative to talk. Yang Chendong only glanced at her and ignored her as if she was invisible. A woman, a beautiful woman, could tolerate a man peeping at her. She also liked a man to act like a gentleman in front of her. She could even understand if there was a hint of lust in his eyes. However, being ignored by others was absolutely intolerable. "Hey, I am talking to you. Didn't you hear me? Do you know that the pursuers will be here soon? If they see me sitting so close to you, you will be in trouble." The woman couldn't stand Yang Chendong ignoring her and finally couldn't help but speak her mind. Finally, Yang Chendong reacted. I know. Didn't you want to say that you will implicate me? But you have already done so. Why are you telling me now? Are you feeling guilty? You know. Seeing that the other party had already seen through her little scheme, the girl's eyes widened even more. But soon she exclaimed, What do you mean by guilty conscience? This young lady wouldn't do that. I just want to tell you that if you sell that horse to me now, I will leave immediately. I promise I won't implicate you. How about it? Nothing much. Yang Chendong shook his head. I don't have any good points, but I am a man of my words. Since I said I won't sell it, then I won't sell it. You can give up now. You. Seeing that Yang Chendong wasn't moved by force or persuasion, the woman was so angry that she was at her wit's end. She simply turned her head and didn't look at him anymore. It was like a couple quarreling and giving each other a cold war. The difference was that the woman's lips were already curled up high. She had no problem hanging the oil jug up and down. On the contrary, Yang Chendong was still half squinting and half lying on the blanket. He looked very comfortable and didn't care about the woman's reaction at all. This made the woman even angrier. She turned her head away and didn't look in his direction. Beta Persei and the other three who were standing around could only shut their mouths tightly. They even deliberately suppressed the sound of their breathing, afraid that they would make a noise and provoke their master's displeasure. Clatter, clatter, clatter. In just a short while, the sound of horse hooves could be heard clearly. Then, after a cloud of dust, a group of 300 cavalrymen wearing foreign race clothes finally appeared in the middle of the ditch, beside the small stream. Sigh. With a sigh, the woman put down the teacup in her hand. She knew that she would have to leave with these people in the end. And from now on she would have no freedom. Thinking of this, she didn't know why she thanked Yang Chendong. Thank you for the tea. Although I don't know how to taste tea, it was very fragrant and delicious. After saying this, the woman began to put on her shoes and tidied up her clothes. She prepared to leave the blanket and stand up. The 300 cavalrymen noticed the woman and bowed in. Under the signal of the strong man at the front, they fanned out and surrounded Yang Chendong and the other 5. A shout sounded, Princess Toya, didn't you say that you were going to relieve yourself? You've walked for a few hundred li. It's going to take us a long time to find you. Princess? When Yang Chendong heard this title, he looked at the woman with a curious gaze. As far as he knew, the imperial daughter of this prairie was different from the imperial daughter of the great Ming dynasty, but at the very least, she was the daughter of a great Khan or Khan. No wonder he felt that this girl's every movement gave people a feeling of magnanimity. It turned out that she was someone with some status. Chapter 678. Princess Tu Oya didn't look at the change in Yang Chendong's expression. At this moment, she had already finished tidying up and was walking down from the blanket. That's enough, Lumek. Since you've caught up to me, this princess will accept her fate. You don't need to point out anything here. Also, you know what kind of moral character you and your master have. These people were coincidentally encountered. This matter has nothing to do with them. Please let them go. I'll go back with you. Princess Tu Oya didn't even turn her head. She only extended her hand and pointed below the large umbrella. After saying this, she very confidently walked towards her warhorse with large strides. At this moment, another voice just happened to ring in her ears. Bring everyone here back. HM? Princess Tu Oya was about to mount her horse when she heard that she was going to bring everyone away. She suddenly turned her head and looked at Lumek. What? Didn't you hear what this princess said? I said, this matter has nothing to do with these 4 people. Apologies, Princess Tu Oya. I don't take orders from you. Lumek replied expressionlessly. Soon after, when his gaze landed on Yang Chendong's group of 4, his eyes revealed a hint of bloodlust. I suspect that these 4 people are Bai Ming spies. Capture them all. Spies! Princess Tu Oya laughed involuntarily. Have you ever seen such a leisurely and affectionate spy? Lumek, don't think that I don't know. You're afraid that the news of me being kidnapped will be sent back to my father. Princess Tu Oya, Everyone says that you're the pearl of the grasslands. Not only are you beautiful, but you're also intelligent. It seems that this is indeed the case. Only, since you already know, why bother asking? Lumik's face finally showed some color. However, no matter how one looked at it, it still seemed like he was mocking her. When he looked at Yang Chendong's group of 4, his gaze even more playful. It seemed as if he was looking at these 4 people as if he was looking at dead people. Cough. Seeing Lumik and Tuoya speaking one after another and deciding their fates, Luoya coughed. From the beginning to the end, no one asked for his opinion. Yang Chendong finally coughed to represent his existence. Sure enough, this cough attracted everyone's attention. Yang Chendong then said slowly, "Let me explain. I just felt that the weather was good, so I came here to take a rest and breathe in the natural air. I'm really not a spy, so you must have misunderstood me. Of course, I'm not a talkative person. I've actually forgotten about what happened just now, so you guys can do what you need to do. Just pretend that I don't exist, all right?" As he spoke, Yang Chendong shrugged his shoulders innocently. Then, he laid back down on the blanket and closed his eyes. It was as if he really couldn't see anything and just came out to take a breath of fresh air. Yang Chendong felt that he was already very low-key. Although he was very curious about Princess Tuoya's identity, Rumk's background also piqued his interest. However, he really didn't plan to do anything now. Whether he was a friend or a foe, he had to investigate to find out. Before that, it would be best if he didn't make a move. However, he didn't know that his current attitude was a provocation in Rumk's eyes. "What do you mean by treating you like an invisible person? You're standing there alive, all right?" Princess Tuoya looked at Yang Chendong's attitude and her beautiful eyes widened again. She really couldn't understand. Is there something wrong with this young and handsome young master's brain? Do you think we're here for a gathering of friends? Who is Rumk? He's a devil who kills without batting an eyelid. What you're doing is simply provoking him, all right? It'll lead to unforeseen and serious consequences. Or do you think you're very good at fighting? There's a total of 4 of you. Oh, there's only 5 people including the ones who were in charge of guarding. It's a fool's dream if you want to fight against 300 cavalry. Princess Tuoya, who couldn't figure out whether Yang Chendong's brain was damaged, felt that the situation was a bit tricky. Rumk was already provoked by Yang Chendong's disregard. In his eyes, this kind of provocation made him want to laugh out loud. This man dressed like a Han and dressed in green probably doesn't know who I am. I hope he'll still be able to laugh when I catch him and chop off his head. What are you still standing there for? Capture him. Kill anyone who resists. The infuriated Rumk issued his threat for the 3rd time. The 300 cavalrymen behind him also felt their souls returning to their bodies. They were also confused by Yang Chendong's performance just now. They wondered how there could be such a reckless person in this world. Since the general had given the order, they naturally wouldn't be polite. Each of them mounted their warhorses and began to shrink the encirclement, moving towards the umbrella. There were also a few cavalrymen who very straightforwardly put away their cavalry sabers and raised their arms. Their appearance was clearly telling the others to watch how he would capture someone alive with his bare hands. Rumk, you dare? Princess Tuoya obviously knew what was going to happen next. When she thought about how she was going to cause the deaths of 4 innocent people, she was so angry that her face turned completely red. However, shouting like this at this time naturally wouldn't have any effect. The 300 cavalrymen were all brought by Rumk. At this moment, they only listened to this one person's orders. The 4 dark-skinned cavalrymen were already itching to give it a try, looking like they were going to charge over and capture someone in the next moment. As their opponent, Yang Chendong was still half lying on the blanket. He didn't even open his eyes, giving off the feeling that he had already accepted his fate. Right at this time, when the cavalrymen were about to make their move, a wave of earth-trembling sounds suddenly sounded. The small stream's water began to ripple again. This movement also attracted Rumk's attention. When he couldn't help but turn around to take a look, his expression immediately became extremely unsightly. Behind them, a group of cavalrymen stood impressively. They were uniformly dressed in pitch-black iron armor and wore unknown military green helmets on their heads. Below the helmets was a black iron mask that completely covered their faces, making it impossible for others to see their appearances. At the same time, a wave of austere aura flickered. What was even more frightening was that the war horses they sat on were actually completely covered in black iron. Even at the position of the horses' legs, only a small section was exposed. It was equivalent to almost completely wrapping and protecting the war horses, achieving the effect of absolute impenetrability. For you, Rumk couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva as he asked. Even though they hadn't fought yet, his senses already told him that this was an extremely elite group of cavalrymen. Even though their numbers weren't as many as his own, if they really fought, he actually didn't even have a 50% chance of victory. In the Walla region, on the grasslands, when did such a heavily armed group of cavalrymen appear? Why didn't he have any information about them before? Could it be that Princess Toya brought them here for the sake of robbing and killing him? Thinking of this, he couldn't help but shift his gaze towards Tuoya. What he saw was a similar expression of shock. Suddenly, Rumk thought of something and quickly turned his gaze towards Yang Chendong, who was under the large umbrella. Unfortunately, he was still half lying down and sleeping. There was nothing different about him at all. A huge question arose in his heart, but Rumk also knew that this wasn't the time to ask questions. Since the enemy had appeared behind them, of course, they had to kill them first. Everyone, pay attention. Turn your horses around and prepare to charge. The 300 cavalrymen quickly turned their horses around and drew their sabers, preparing to charge. Charge! Kill. In the next moment, almost at the same time, both sides launched their attacks forward. At this moment, the battle cries disrupted the tranquility by the stream. At this moment, blood began to wreak havoc, and the pungent smell of blood permeated the originally fresh air. Yang Chendong also sat up. At this moment, he couldn't pretend to be asleep, and he couldn't treat everything with indifference. He wanted to see just how powerful this black armor that had cost a fortune to create was. He wanted to see just what kind of amazing battle results could be achieved in the hands of these fast-trained, battle-hardened, and highly skilled guards. Under Yang Chendong's gaze, the cavalrymen from both sides charged and engaged in a chaotic battle. Sabers, broadswords, and spears clashed against each other. From time to time, there would be cavalrymen falling from their horses. From time to time, there would be streams of blood spurting into the sky, and from time to time, there would be cries of pain. After carefully observing the battlefield for a moment, Yang Chendong's lips curled up. As far as the eye could see, all those who fell from their war horses were enemies. Until now, not a single guard had died in battle, and not even a single one had been injured. Of course, this didn't mean that they wouldn't be injured, but because the protection was too comprehensive, they didn't even need to think about defense when facing the enemy. They only needed to swing their sharp sabers and kill. Regardless of whether it was themselves or their horses, they had absolute protection. Unless the enemy's saber, sword, or even arrows could shoot into their mouths or eyes. But obviously, the guards' military quality was quite high, and they would never allow these key positions to become the enemy's target. After observing for a moment, Yang Chendong felt relieved. He had a deeper understanding of the warhorse armor, but it was a pity in his heart. The materials needed to create a warhorse armor like this were too much. If he could really have 10,000 cavalrymen like this, wouldn't he be able to sweep through the entire grassland without any opponents? After relaxing, he poured himself a cup of tea and said softly, "Good, the tea is still warm." While Yang Chendong was leisurely sipping his tea, more than half of the 300 enemies were dead or injured. Even if less than half of them were alive, most of them were injured. If not for their excellent horsemanship, they would have fallen from their horses by now. Chapter 679. On the battlefield, Lumek had already gone from the initial shock to the current powerlessness. Originally, he thought that with 300 against 100, even if the opponent's equipment was excellent, he would be able to exhaust them to death. But when he really fought, he realized that this was not a battle, but a beating. If he slashed the enemy, the enemy would be fine. If the enemy slashed him, he would have to pay the price of serious injury or even death. This was simply an unfair battle. Seeing his brothers die one by one, and seeing the number of comrades around him decrease, Lumek had no choice but to make a decision, which was to leave the battlefield and leave this place. He would report what happened to the higher-ups, and then wait for an opportunity to take revenge. Everyone, retreat. Their warhorses are heavily armored, so they won't be as fast as us. After exchanging blows with another member of the security team, Lumek's long saber only managed to produce a series of sparks. Finally, Lumek gave up on the thought of continuing to kill the enemy. He turned around and retreated. Some of the cavalrymen who were very close to Lumek also followed suit and turned to flee. In order to avoid being shot by the arrows, they kept making all sorts of evasive maneuvers on their horses. From afar, they looked as agile as monkeys. Seeing that the enemy was about to escape, Beta Persei bowed and asked Yang Chendong for instructions. "Young master, don't worry about them. Let the team withdraw and sum up their combat experience." Yang Chendong naturally knew what Beta Persei meant. Now that Lumek was leaving, it was just as he had said. The members of the Iron Cloak Guards were clearly at a disadvantage in terms of speed. It was impossible to chase after them, and even arrows might not be able to reach them. Unless they used guns now, but this might expose their identities. After all, an army with continuous fire guns would easily make people think that they were related to mercenaries. He dared to use it against the Beiming guards because he believed that none of them would be able to escape. But now, he did not have the confidence to kill all of Lumek and the others. Since that was the case, he might as well let them go. Of course, if the other party wanted to take revenge because of this, he would eat as many as they came. He was never afraid of war. For example, many founding emperors had gone through countless battles and life-and-death situations to achieve success. But then, they would talk about using virtue to win people over and rule the country with literature. Yang Chendong was different from them. He started from nothing, and he relied on his powerful martial strength to achieve all of this. Therefore, he would not be like the other emperors and hide anything. So what if he established the country with martial prowess? Since the country was founded on martial prowess, why should they fear war? Right now, the 5-star army needed a baptism of war. So if there must be a storm, then let the storm come fiercely. That's right, arrange for people to post the sentries further away. If the enemy makes any strange movements, immediately inform the surrounding troops to surround and eat them. After that, Yang Chendong picked up the teacup on the small table and drank it slowly. Yes. Beta Persei stood up straight and waved to the fully armed guards who were still waiting for orders. Immediately, more than 100 riders scattered in all directions, appearing and disappearing as mysteriously as when they first appeared. The difference was that when they left, they took away the captured warhorses and the enemy's corpses. "Hey, these are indeed your troops. Hey, who are you? My name is Narain Tuya, and my father is Sood, the Khan of Mabe, Mongolia." This hand gesture was seen by the sharp-eyed Princess Tuya. She immediately skipped back to the umbrella, taking off her riding boots and sitting down on the blanket without regard for anyone else. Princess Bao Yin, who was accompanying her, saw that Tuya had exposed her identity and wanted to stop her. Unfortunately, it was too late, so he simply shut his mouth. Mabe, Mongolia. Yang Chendong listened to the introduction and nodded silently. In 1402, northern Yuan was destroyed. After the Yuan dynasty was destroyed, Mongolia was divided into many tribes. Later, it gradually formed into 3 major tribes according to the area they lived in. The Mongols who were distributed in the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region and the 3 northeastern provinces were called Mabe Mongolia, which was also known as Korkan tribe. The Mongols who were distributed in Xinjiang, Qinghai, and Gansu were called Mabe Mongolia, which was also known as Khalkha tribe. The Mongols who were distributed in Xinjiang, Qinghai, and Gansu were called Mabe Mongolia, which was also known as Oirat Mongolia. The territory of Mabe Mongolia should be between the Wala and Tatar tribes. This could also explain why Yang Chendong would coincidentally meet Princess Tuya here. "I'm just a nobody," Not worth mentioning. Yang Chendong casually waved his hand and had no intention of saying his name. Hey, you're so boring. I've already told you my name and identity, but you're not even willing to say your name. That's unreasonable. How about this? You tell me your name, and I'll tell you why Lumik is chasing me. How about it? Tuya looked angry at first, but when she saw that Yang Chendong was unmoved, she could only suppress her dissatisfaction and add another bargaining chip. Needless to say, Yang Chendong was really curious about Lumik's identity. He actually dared to make things difficult for Princess Tuya, the daughter of the Mabe Mongolian Khan. After thinking for a while, he thought that it was just a name, and he wouldn't lose anything. He nodded and said, "Okay, I'll tell you. My name is Yang Dong." Yang Dong was Yang Chendong's name in his previous life, so it wasn't a lie. Yang Dong? I've never heard of you. Tuya first rested her chin on her hand and thought carefully. However, she didn't have any impression of him, so she simply didn't care so much. Instead, she laughed and said, "This Lumik, he's from Agar Dorji. Right, you know this person, right?" I know. He's Tuachuobua's younger brother from a different mother." Yang Chendong nodded. This information had been reported by the Security Bureau a long time ago. Speaking of which, this happened last year. Just like in history, the Walla's leader, Yes Hen, and Tuachuobuhua were known as monarch and minister, but only in name. Tuachuobua's wife was Yeshen's sister. Yes Hen wanted to make his sister's son the crown prince, but Tuachuobuhua refused. Yes Hen suspected that Tuachuobuhua was secretly in cahoots with the Ming dynasty, which was disadvantageous to him. As a result, in the 12th month of the second year of Jingtai, 1451, he attacked. In the end, Tuachuobuhua was defeated because his younger brother, Agar Dorji, and Yes Hen colluded and attacked from both sides. However, what was different from history was that they had just defeated Tuobuhua. Before they could follow up on their victory, they suddenly had a conflict with Northern Ming. Then, both sides started fighting again. This gave Tuobuhua a chance to recuperate. The most unfortunate of them all was his younger brother, Agar Dorji. Seeing that his brother was still alive and had turned against the Northern Ming Empire, Agar Dorji had no choice but to retreat with his cavalry out of fear that the Northern Ming Empire would seek revenge. Seeing that Yang Chendong said that he knew, Tuo-ye did not suspect anything. After all, this was a big matter that anyone with a bit of status would know. She continued, Agar Dorji's strength is not bad. He has 50,000 cavalry. However, when there are many soldiers, he needs provisions and a base. After thinking about it, he set his sights on the Mongols of the Gobi Desert. His son, Halaku, wants to marry me and form an alliance with the Gobi Desert Mongols through marriage. He wants to maintain the army's expenses and find opportunities to strengthen his own strength. It's just that Halakuku is too ugly. I don't like him. That's why even though Father Khan ordered me to go to their camp, I still managed to find a way to escape. What do you think? I'm smart, right? Tuo-ye said proudly, as if she had done something amazing. When Yang Chendong heard all of this, his face darkened. That, you don't want to marry him because he's ugly? That's part of it. Without noticing the change in Yang Chendong's expression, Tuo-ye continued, it's mainly because my father understood the purpose of Agar Dorji. It's not true that they want to marry us, but they want to take the opportunity to annex us. After saying this, she noticed Yang Chendong's darkened face. Tuya couldn't help but ask anxiously, Hey, what do you mean? Are you saying that only you men can pursue beautiful things, and we women can't? Sure. Why can't we? If you say so, then so be it. Yang Chendong was not stupid enough to reason with a girl, especially when this person was from the Appearance Association. Seeing that Yang Chendong had admitted defeat, Tuo-ye raised her chin happily like a proud peacock. However, this self-satisfaction did not last long. She said worriedly, You almost killed Lumik just now. Now that he has escaped, he will definitely come back for revenge. You should be from Baiming, right? You should hurry back. Although they are powerful, they won't dare to go to Baiming's territory to seek revenge. He could feel Tuo-ye's good intentions. In fact, although this woman was a bit unreasonable, She took the initiative to cut ties with him after Lumek appeared. She was not a bad person. Only then did Yang Chendong have the mood to smile and say to the other party, "Why should I run? He was the one who took the initiative to find trouble with me. He wanted to kill me. I can't just stretch my neck and wait. Besides, they were defeated by me, so they should be afraid and won't come back." Ha! As if she heard a funny joke, Tuoya shook her head. "Young Master Yang, you don't understand them. Just now, the cavalry under your command did indeed display great battle prowess, but in the end, you only have 100 cavalry. Besides, this is not Baiming's territory, but the grasslands. It belongs to the Mongols and the Tartars. It would be strange if they let you go. I said before that they have 50,000 cavalry. Less than 200 of them died. It's not a big deal." 50,000 cavalry? Are they going to send all of them to deal with me? Yang Chendong pretended to be surprised. Chapter 680. That won't happen. Their main force is not around here. After all, this place is also our Khalkha tribe. If they send out their army without permission, it will cause a misunderstanding. But it is still possible for them to send 1,000 cavalry. No matter how powerful your cavalry is, it is still impossible for 100 to fight 1,000. Besides, your cavalry is not without weaknesses. Anyone can see that they are not fast enough. Once they are entangled in a battle of attrition, they will eventually lose. Tuoya's analysis made Yang Chendong nod his head. If the other party only sent 1,000 cavalry, then he had nothing to be afraid of. On the contrary, he could capture a large number of warhorses. Wasn't this taking the initiative to give him a gift? Thinking of this, Yang Chendong simply lay down on the blanket again. Since that is the case, this young master will wait for them here. I want to see what they can do to me. Yang Chendong's casual manner naturally caused an anxious expression to appear on Tuoya's face. "You? Why aren't you leaving? Hey, do you really think I am joking with you?" After calling out a few times, she did not see any movement from Yang Chendong. The anxious Tuoya said to Bao Yin, who was standing behind her, "Go, immediately inform my father and ask him to bring the army here." "Prince?" Bao Yin's face was filled with anxiety. "Princess, you'd better return with me. Wouldn't it be better for you to tell Khan personally? I go back? If I go back, will my father still bring people here to rescue? All right, go back alone and tell my father that if he does not send troops in time, he may never see his daughter again. Go, this is an order." Tuoya seemed to know that it was impossible to reason with Bao Yin, so she simply gave the order as her mistress. Sure enough, as soon as Yang Chendong said that, although Bao Yin still looked hesitant, she finally nodded. After glancing at Yang Chendong, she turned around and rode away quickly. Yang Heir, who was watching from the side, couldn't help but secretly give Tuoya a thumbs up for her actions. This girl had some eyesight. She could see that his young master was not ordinary. It was a wise move to befriend him now. Of course, it would be even better if she could repay him with her body. Although Yang Chendong now had 5 wives and concubines, and Luan Xiaoyu who was waiting to be married when she reached the age, he still did not have a single child. This not only made all the Yangtze's senior officers anxious. It was always worrying to have no children, and they were also afraid that there would be no successor. However, as his subordinates, they really could not do anything. They could only hope that the young master had more women, which meant that there would be more opportunities. Seeing how big Tuoya's chest was, she should be able to give birth to children. Beta Persei was still discussing in his heart. Yang Chendong did not know about this. After seeing that Tuoya actually took the initiative to stay, he asked curiously, "Why aren't you leaving? Aren't you afraid that Lumek will bring his troops back? My cavalry won't be able to protect you. I was the one who brought the hatred. How can I leave? Do you think that we grassland women don't understand reason?" Tuoya rolled her eyes at Yang Chendong and said righteously. After saying this, her face unknowingly turned red, and she quickly lowered her head to hide it. Tuoya admitted that Yang Chendong gave her a good impression. This man was very handsome and so young. If she were to compare who would be a suitable husband, He would be much better than that ugly Hararo. Of course, she stayed here because she was curious about the black-clad cavalry. She didn't know why, but she had a feeling that even if Lumek brought his troops here, it wouldn't be difficult for this handsome young master. In short, she was infected by Yang Chendong's strong confidence. Yang Chendong was speechless after seeing Tuo Ya's heroic side. He could only say, "All right, then let's wait a little longer. If the sun is about to set and the enemy doesn't appear, then we'll go our separate ways." After saying this, Yang Chendong took a sip of tea and closed his eyes again. Tuo Ya, who wasn't chased away, didn't care about this. Since she was able to stay, she used this opportunity to talk non-stop like a machine gun. She selectively told Yang Chendong some of the secrets of the grassland that she knew about. Although it was selective, some things were still kept secret to the outside world. This piqued the interest of the sixth young master, who had originally wanted to close his eyes and take a nap. After a while, the conversation between the two of them became more and more lively, as if they were old friends. Lumek fled in defeat. After running a certain distance, he saw that there were no invincible soldiers chasing after him. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. But then his face was filled with anger. He and his 300 cavalry couldn't even defeat the enemy's 100 cavalry. To him, this was absolutely intolerable. As a proud general, of course he wouldn't let this matter pass. He wanted revenge. "Let's go. Come with me to find the young master." Lumek whipped his horse and led the defeated cavalry to turn a corner and gallop away. His luck wasn't bad. He originally thought that he would have to run for 2 hours before finding Haro. He didn't expect that the young master was worried about Tuoya and had already chased after him with 5,000 cavalry. Hararo had 5,000 cavalry. Even if they met the Mongolian cavalry of the Gobi Desert, they would be able to protect themselves. After all, neither side wanted a war of this scale. The answer was likely to be a mutual retreat. With this in mind, Hararo wasn't too surprised when he saw Lumek appear with his defeated army. "What's wrong? Did you meet the main force of the Gobi Desert?" "Young master, I don't know if that's the case," Lumek said gloomily. It didn't matter if they lost the war. As long as they were still alive, they could always learn from the experience and fight again. But what he couldn't accept was that he didn't even know the enemy's background. "You don't know?" Hararo's face turned ugly. He wanted to shout out trash, but when he thought about it, he suppressed his anger and asked, "Tell me, what's going on?" "Yes, young master, the situation is like this." Lumek chased after Tuoya, but there was someone else with her, especially a handsome young man. Then, a group of unknown black cavalry appeared. Halarua listened silently at first. When he heard that Tuoya was with a young man, his eyes became as deep as water. Although he only liked Tuoya for her beauty and wanted to use the marriage to find a place to develop, Tuoya was already like a piece of meat in his heart. How could he allow another man to taint her? "Take me to him, I want to kill him." Hararua roared. The murderous intent in his eyes was almost tangible. Beside a small stream, under a large umbrella, Yang Chendong drank the last cup of tea. His face was filled with satisfaction and regret. He was satisfied because of the leisure he had for half a day. Usually, when he was in the military camp, he would either read information or look at the sand table. Occasionally, when he had time to rest, he would exercise his body. When had he ever relaxed like today? Although he learned more about the situation when chatting with Princess Tuya, time always passed quickly when chatting with a beauty. He didn't feel tired. Regretfully, Lumek didn't bring anyone to cause trouble for them. Originally, he wanted to wait for them to come and take the opportunity to obtain more warhorses. Now, it seemed that he wouldn't be able to do as he wished. "All right, the tea is finished, and the sun is about to set. I should also go back. Let's meet again, Princess Tuya." Yang Chendong sat up straight and stretched his waist. Beta Persei brought Ba Dao Jiang and his friends over and began to pack up the small table, large umbrella, and blankets. Tuoya pouted and unwillingly got up to put on her shoes. Yang Chendong was about to leave. Lumek hadn't come, so he had no reason to stay here. After all, she was still a girl. She couldn't really stay here. Although the women of the steppe were much more magnanimous than the women of the Central Plains, as unmarried women, there was a limit to what they could do. Yang Chendong didn't know what Tuoya was thinking, but he really didn't want to incur any more emotional debt. Moreover, although Tuoya could be considered pretty, and her position was definitely a lethal weapon, she wasn't the type that would make people lose control of themselves at first sight. At the very least, she was far inferior to Hu Yan's gentleness, Qiao Yin's obedience, and Su Maner's seductive charm. Madame Shui and Madame Xiang also had their own merits. The former courtesan of the capital had many unique skills. Even Luan Xiaoyu, who wasn't even 18 yet, was as understanding as the little sister next door. She looked even more valiant and heroic in her military uniform. It could be said that people couldn't be compared to each other. Yang Chendong didn't mean this. Even though he knew that Tuoya had an extraordinary status, he didn't urge her to stay. How could a man rely on a woman and his pants to establish himself in the world? At this moment, even though he saw Tuoya's unhappy face, Yang Chendong didn't have any intention of changing his mind. He remained silent the entire time, watching Princess Tuoya walk in front of his warhorse with a face full of displeasure and reluctance. Report. Seeing that Tuoya had already lifted one of her feet and was about to get on her horse at any moment, First Guard Captain Chiovi appeared in front of him. With a loud shout, he broke the originally peaceful atmosphere. Chiovi didn't kneel, only saluting with his body stretched taut. He said, "The scouts report that there's a group of cavalry approaching us from the northwest. There are about 5,000 of them." 5,000 cavalry? A look of shock flashed across Yang Chendong's face. He had thought that Rumak would come for revenge, but he didn't expect so many cavalry. If he had been prepared, with the 15,000 cavalry in his hands, he naturally wouldn't be afraid of 5,000 infantrymen. But the enemy had come too suddenly. He didn't know how many cavalry he could mobilize in such a short time. Chapter 681. His gaze fell on Chiovi. Where are the various units? How many of them can we contact? Reporting to the 6th Young Master, the 3 divisions of the Cold Vanguard Division are currently undergoing long-distance training and cannot be contacted for the time being. The independent regiment is further away and most of them are infantry. According to the location they reported earlier, they should be about 30 miles away from us. The 1st and 2nd Cavalry regiments have already sent people to inform them. They are even further away from us, more than 100 miles away. I'm afraid that they will have to wait until dawn to arrive when they receive the news. Now, only the Nuzan Cavalry Regiment and the Logistics Battalion are at the base camp. They will arrive in half an hour. Chiovi's body was covered in a layer of cold sweat as he reported. He wouldn't have known if he didn't say anything. After he finished, he realized that the young master's forces were actually so weak. The only force that could really come immediately was the Nuzan Cavalry Regiment. Of course, in his eyes, the Logistics Battalion did not have the slightest bit of combat power. Beta Persei also heard it clearly from the side. He also felt that the situation was a little serious. He took the initiative to say, "Young Master, the Logistics Battalion can also go to the battlefield. No matter what, they have the strength of 1,000 people." Say no more. Yang Chendong waved his hand. Not only would he not let the Logistics Battalion go to the battlefield, he would not even return to the base camp. He did not know what the outcome of this battle would be. Once their main camp was destroyed, the army would have a hard time moving through the grasslands without rations. He could not take the risk. Yang Chendong looked at Chiovi and asked, "Is there any terrain nearby that is suitable for the cavalry to fight?" Chiovi did not understand what Yang Chendong meant, but since it was the young master who asked, he thought about it carefully and said, "There is a short stone pile about 5 miles away from here. It is densely covered in gravel and is not suitable for a large group of cavalry to fight." 5 miles? Yang Chendong only thought for a short while before the location of the short rocks in the sand table appeared in his mind. He immediately nodded. "Okay, let's choose the battlefield there." At the same time, he sent out all the scouts on hand and asked them to contact the main forces, telling them to quickly approach the pile of short rocks and look for opportunities to fight. Also, inform Commander Yi La to bring the Nuzan Cavalry Division to reinforce us. In a very short period of time, Yang Chendong was ready to fight. However, as soon as he finished speaking, Beta Persei said anxiously, "Young master, the Nuzan Cavalry is not a direct army. If the situation is unclear, I'm afraid they will. They'll betray us, won't they?" Yang Chendong finished for Beta Persei. Then he sneered and said, "I believe that Yi La is not a short-sighted person. If he is, then sooner or later he will rebel. Isn't it the best of both worlds to use this opportunity to test him? Okay, it's decided. Captain Chiu, you can go and pass down the order." Yang Chendong wouldn't tell anyone that he had the secret of the warehouse. If Yella really wanted to go against him and threaten him together with Lumik, then he wouldn't mind taking out some weapons from the warehouse that would give them a scare. For example, he could casually drive out an armored tank. That was a good thing that could even block bullets. What could those bows and arrows do? At that time, he would kill in all directions. He would turn the pile of short rocks into a pile of bones and a pile of blood. He sighed in his heart. "Yi La, you better not disappoint me. Otherwise, because of you, I'm afraid that no Nuzan will appear in this world in the future." Yang Chendong pursued the goal of achieving it by hook or by crook. He could give others a chance, but there was only one chance. If you couldn't seize it, then sorry, the next thing would be the power of thunder that would destroy the world. Chiovi had followed Yang Chendong for a long time. Naturally, he could see the determination of the sixth young master. After saluting, he turned around and left. On the other side, Princess Tu Oya also walked over at this time. "What's wrong? Did Lumei come again? Why don't you go northeast? I'm sure that Bao Yin has already told her father about me. There should be people coming to receive us." At that time, no matter how bold Rumak is, he won't dare to act rashly. Tuoya was truly kind. Yang Chendong could feel it. However, as a man, how could he live under the protection of a woman? Besides, war was the reason he came to this place in the first place. Sometimes, as the war continued, there would be fewer and fewer people. When those who were unconvinced became corpses and those who were convinced were still alive, then it would be time to unify this place. Yang Chendong, who wouldn't back down and had no reason to do so, naturally rejected Tuoya's kind intentions. In return, he didn't let her leave this time. Instead, he said in an inviting tone, "Rumak is indeed coming. This time, he brought 5,000 cavalrymen with him. Why don't you come with me? It will be safer that way." Since the enemy cavalry was coming, they would definitely send out light cavalry scouts. Once they found out that Tuoya was alone, there was no telling what would happen. As a man, he naturally had the responsibility to protect a woman. Not to mention, she wanted to help him out of kindness. Tuoya pointed at herself and said in disbelief, "You allow me to follow you?" "Yes, for your safety. It should be now. Rumak's cavalry scouts should have surrounded us. It is too dangerous for you to leave now." Yang Chendong said seriously, trying to be as emotionless as possible. However, when Tuoya heard this, she was still touched. "See, he is still worried about me." Although she couldn't say that she liked Yang Chendong, she didn't know why, but at this moment, her heart was filled with joy and joy. Things were just as Yang Chendong expected. Rumak's cavalry scouts had indeed locked onto the stream. When the first and second squad walked towards the pile of short rocks, they followed from a distance. These scouts didn't have any intention of attacking. Even when they saw the cavalrymen galloping past them, they didn't make any moves to stop them. Scouts were scouts. Their responsibility was to gather information and lock onto targets. As for the rest, it was naturally left to the combat troops. The pile of short rocks, as its name suggested, was made up of piles of broken rocks. Even after many months, it didn't seem to be very high. The highest point was only about 3 meters high. It didn't give them any advantage of looking down from a high vantage point. Fortunately, Yang Chendong didn't want to look for a high vantage point. He was satisfied as long as there was a place where he could stand and see further. The highest point of the pile of short rocks just happened to meet his requirements. Riding the white dragon horse, Yang Chendong slowly ascended and came to the top of the pile of short stones. Everywhere he looked, there were piles of stones one after another. They were scattered in all directions, dividing the area in front of him into dozens of pieces. This was the place where Yang Chendong asked for a small-scale cavalry battle. Chiu Vi had already said that the information from the scouting camp was that the enemy had about 5,000 cavalry. If that was the case, if they were to find an open space, the enemy would be able to kill them in a single charge. There wouldn't be much room to maneuver. "Young master, are we going to stay here for a while?" Beta Persei saw Yang Chendong stop on his white dragon horse and guessed something. "That's right. This young master will stay here for a while. Come, put the flag here. From today onwards, the name of the 5-star army will be known throughout the grasslands." Yang Chendong said with a heroic tone, then pointed to an open space beside him. Hearing this, Beta Persei called for the guard team to take out a bright 5-star flag and put it beside Yang Chendong. The red flag immediately fluttered in the wind, showing off its charm. All the guard team members wore black armor with iron masks and wore Kevlar helmets that didn't fit in to protect the important parts of their heads. Yang Chendong also covered his white dragon horse with a layer of iron armor and changed into the same outfit as the other guard team members. When they stood under the 5-star flag like this, a powerful aura was unknowingly born. It made Princess Toya, who was watching all this curiously from the side, feel like she was about to meet the Great Khan. Just as the preparations were in place, a cloud of dust rose from the south of the pile of short rocks, making it impossible to see who was coming and how many people there were. Out of instinct, Toya asked with some apprehension, "Is it the cavalry brought by Rumak?" Looking in the direction, Yang Chendong shook his head with a smile. "It shouldn't be them, it's our cavalry." "Your cavalry?" Toya was a little surprised after saying this. She was more and more unable to understand the origin of this Yang Dong. She was certain that this was the first time she saw the 5-star flag in front of her. But this curiosity was quickly suppressed. Right in front of them, another cavalry team loomed in the distance. Toya, who was riding beside Yang Chendong, had a solemn expression on her face. Although Yang Chendong had already surprised her, the number of cavalry that Rumak brought was obviously too much. Even if there were more than 100 black cavalry, could they turn the situation around? If Yang Chendong was defeated by Rumak, as a fellow traveler, she wouldn't have an easy time either. Thinking of this, Toya's gaze looked towards the northeast, but there was still no movement there. It made sense when she thought about it. Bao Yin had only left for a short period of time. Her father still needed to gather the cavalry when he received the news. It was impossible for him to rush over so quickly. What was different from Toya was that Yang Chendong's expression was normal. He didn't show any fluctuations in his emotions from beginning to end. Until the first cavalry team appeared, a rider jumped out and arrived under the pile of rocks. Nuzan cavalry team leader Yi Wei greets the 6th young master. Chapter 682. Yi La did not kneel as he was not used to saluting. Instead, he placed his right hand in front of his chest and made a salute similar to the Mongols. "Yi La, you only have 3,000 men. This time, your opponent has 5,000 cavalry. Do you have the confidence to fight? Do you have the confidence to win?" Yang Chendong's bright eyes stared at Yi La, 6th young master. "Don't worry. Our Nuzan cavalry will fight to the last moment and do our best." Yi La's expression was firm, as if saying, "Just wait and see what we'll do." "Then I will wait for your excellent performance," Yang Chendong said in a heroic voice. In his eyes, there was no trace of worry. He also did not say anything to boost morale. It was as though the Nuzan cavalry was his direct subordinates and there was no need to doubt him. Yi La originally thought that Yang Chendong would say something to boost morale. At the very least, he should give him some assurance. However, he did not say anything. This made him feel that he was trusted. Yes, he was trusted. When facing a true subordinate, there was no need for any promises. They would do their best. Seeing that Yang Chendong had nothing else to say, Yila turned around and mounted his horse to return to the troops. He looked at Lu Dai and the 3,000 cavalrymen and said loudly, "Brothers, it's time for us to perform. The 6th young master is looking at us from behind. Our parents and wives in our hometown are also waiting for us to perform meritorious deeds. Right now, we only need to do our best to destroy the enemy cavalry and give them a better life. Is everyone confident? Kill the enemy and perform meritorious deeds. Kill the enemy and perform meritorious deeds." The 3,000 Nuzan cavalry below all shouted excitedly. "Very good. Divide the cavalry according to the plan. Spread out according to the different terrains. Use the Nuzan's unique guerrilla tactics and a 3-to-3 attack formation." Yi La, who had shouted, announced the battle order coolly. Yi La was very confident in these elite Nuzan cavalry. As long as they performed well, what was there to be afraid of even if there were more than 5,000 cavalry? The 3,000 Nuzan cavalrymen that had just gathered dispersed, and each of them searched for a suitable battlefield. Atop the pile of rocks, Tu Aya said worriedly, "Young Master Yang, you only have 3,000 cavalry while the other side has 5,000. Can you win?" "Definitely." Yang Chendong's firm voice came out from his mouth. His eyes were indifferent as he stood there like a god descending to the mortal world, like a towering mountain. The Nuzan cavalry was making all sorts of preparations before the battle. In the distance, Halaraku and Rumyuk were approaching with their 5,000 cavalrymen. According to the cavalry scouts under his command, Haliruo already knew that the strength of the enemy this time was not weak. They actually had 3,000 cavalrymen. Of course, although they weren't weak, he still didn't put them in his eyes. He had brought the Wala cavalry that he thought was the most powerful. Back then, Sha Ming's army was like cutting chickens and vegetables. They had won more than once. Not to mention, now that they had the advantage in numbers, there was even less chance of defeat. "Rumyuk, your chance to show off has come. I've taken a fancy to these horses and slaves, do you understand?" Haliruo's eyes revealed a trace of ruthlessness as he spoke. "Young master, don't worry." Rumyuk patted his chest and promised. His thoughts were the same as Haliruo's. His limited vision made him believe that the Wala cavalry was the strongest in the world. As for the previous loss to the 100 or so black cavalry, that was only because the enemy's equipment was too good. That was a special case. "Cavalrymen, attack with me." Taking out the saber at his waist, he leaned forward and waved it. Under Rumyuk's loud roar, the 5,000 cavalrymen behind him moved. Like dumplings being dropped into a pot, the cavalrymen charged forward one after another. Tens of thousands of horses galloped forward, their shouts shaking the sky. Under the dry weather, bursts of smoke and dust rose up. From afar, it looked like a huge sandstorm that wanted to swallow everything. In terms of momentum, the Vala cavalry's performance was still very good. However, because of the terrain, the warhorses were unable to gallop on the sharp stones. The originally huge flood had no choice but to split up in the middle and charge towards the small battlefields that the Nuzan cavalry had set up. If it was in a wide area, the cavalry would compete in momentum. The morale of the troops, the number of soldiers, and the bravery of the soldiers would all play a decisive role. Once one side's formation was disrupted and broken, it often meant that the balance of the battle was tipping. It often meant that the battle was about to end. Yang Chendong used the terrain in advance to suppress the Wala cavalry's advantage in numbers. This competition was based on the morale, courage, and martial arts of both sides. Yang Chendong was extremely confident in all of these. He had spent a lot of effort to subdue the Nuzan cavalry. He firmly believed that this time, they would be able to deliver a perfect result. No one knew better than him how the future Nuzan cavalry became slaves and how they replaced the Ming dynasty to establish a new dynasty. In addition, these Nuzan cavalry were equipped with the sharpest sabers. There was no way they would lose. There was no reason for them to lose. The smoke and dust in the sky greatly affected the effect of watching the battle. When the two sides fought, both Yang Chendong and Hararuo could not see the situation on the battlefield. However, the two of them were not in a hurry. They seemed to be full of confidence in their cavalry. They even firmly believed that the moment the battle ended, the winner would be them. Compared to the calmness of these two people, Tuoya looked as if she had lost her soul. If the Khan sent reinforcements, they would only appear there. But when would they arrive? On the battlefield, the smoke and dust in the sky also affected the knights on both sides. Fortunately, this was not the first time they had fought on the battlefield. As veterans, they knew that being impatient would not solve any problems. Only by believing in the sabers in their hands, believing in the warhorses under them, and killing more enemies would they be able to obtain the final victory. One of the Wala cavalry lost contact with his comrades because of the obstruction, but he did not panic. Instead, he held the saber in his hand and carefully sensed everything around him. While continuing to find his comrades, he was also on guard against the sudden appearance of enemies. Suddenly, there was movement on the right side of his body. Out of instinct, the Wala cavalry raised the saber in his hand. The moment he saw that the other person was not his comrade, he quickly lowered the saber in his hand. Under the powerful force, the saber collided with the saber on the opposite side. Ding. With a crisp but powerful collision, the two of them paused at the same time, and then separated immediately upon contact. Both sides were prepared for this strike, and no one was able to gain any advantage. The two figures crossed each other, turned around, and slashed out again. It was almost the same tactic, the same posture, and the two sabers collided again. Then one of the sabers suddenly broke from the middle. The broken weapon was naturally the saber in the hands of the Vara cavalry. If it was not for the huge impact, perhaps his saber could have held on for a while. But when both sides used their full strength, after two clashes, the advantage of weapons was highlighted. The saber actually broke from the middle, and cold sweat instantly emerged from the body of the Wala cavalryman. Although it was June and the weather was very hot, he did not know why he was sweating all over. He did not know why. But since the saber in his hand broke from the middle, the next thing to do was to escape. Otherwise, if both sides swung their sabers, one saber could not reach the enemy's saber, but the enemy's saber could cut him. How could he fight this battle? Fortunately, when the saber hit the second time, the two sides were already facing each other, so it was naturally the best time to escape. The Wala cavalry pressed his legs and urged his horse to rush forward. He did not dare to turn back and fight the Nuzan cavalry head-on. The Vara cavalryman was still lamenting his good luck that he wasn't killed by the enemy due to the disadvantage of his saber. Suddenly, another cavalryman rushed out of the smoke. It was another Nuzan cavalryman. Out of instinct and habit, the cavalryman slashed forward with his saber. However, he had forgotten that the saber in his hand had already been broken in half. Not only did his saber not hit his opponent, it was his opponent's saber that landed on his chest instead. Blood splattered, and a warm stream splashed on his face. While the Wala cavalry felt these changes, the strength in his body was quickly drained at this moment. He wanted to say something, for example, if it were not for the broken saber, he would not have died. But now, his chest was split open, and his bones and organs were exposed. No matter how he opened his mouth, he could not make a sound. Pluck. With no strength left, the Wala cavalry finally fell from the horse. He looked at the sky with his eyes wide open. Perhaps this moment was a relief for him. This was just one of the many places on the battlefield. In fact, the same scene was happening all the time. Not long after the battle, countless Wala cavalry died because of the broken saber. They may be good at fighting, or they may be good at riding. But how could they defeat the equally powerful Nuzan cavalry with their bare hands? One by one, the Wala cavalrymen were hacked to death and fell from their warhorses, causing a cloud of dust to fly into the air. Outside the battlefield, Har did not know that the scales of victory had tilted to the other side. He was still dreaming of the victory. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.